My son drew a picture of our family. There was an extra person standing behind me that he colored in very carefully. I bought the house in August, 2 months after the divorce was finalized. It wasn't the house I'd imagined for us. It was smaller than that, older, with radiators that clanked through the night and a kitchen window that fogged up whenever you boiled water. But it had a yard, a real one, with a maple tree big enough that Oliver immediately claimed it as his. He named it Gerald on the first day. That felt like enough. Starting over at 33 is a specific kind of loneliness that's hard to explain to people who haven't done it. It's not the sharp grief of a sudden loss. It's quieter than that. It's standing in an empty living room surrounded by boxes, realizing that every single decision from here on out is yours alone, and not being sure yet whether that feels like freedom or a sentence. Most days that first month, it felt like both. But Oliver made it easier. He always made things easier. He was 5, gap-toothed and wildly optimistic, the kind of kid who woke up every morning like something good was definitely about to happen. While I was still learning which light switches did what, he had already memorized every creak in the floorboards and decided the one outside his bedroom was saying good morning. I was trying to build a home. He already lived in one. He loved to draw. Had since he could hold a crayon. Long before the drawings looked like anything, he'd fill pages with intention, tongue pressed between his teeth, deeply serious about whatever was taking shape in his mind. By October, when the maple tree in the yard went red and the nights started coming earlier, the front of our refrigerator was almost entirely buried under his work. Dogs that looked like clouds, a dinosaur in what I think was a grocery store, a series of portraits of Gerald the tree in different moods. That October was a rainy one. I remember the particular sound the house made in wet weather. The old radiator clicking on for the first time that season, knocking and hissing like it was waking up from a long sleep, while rain tapped steadily against the kitchen glass. I'd come to love that sound. It felt like company on the evenings when Oliver went to bed early and the house got very quiet. It was a Tuesday night in the second week of October when he brought me the drawing. I was making pasta, half watching something on my laptop propped on the counter, when he padded in from the living room in his socks and held the paper up at arm's length the way he always did, a formal presentation. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and took it from him. He'd drawn our family. The style was classic Oliver. Figures rendered in that confident, boneless way young kids draw people, all circle heads and straight-line arms. He'd labeled everyone in his careful, still learning letters. There was Oliver on the left, grinning, with what I assumed were flames or possibly a mane coming off his head. There was our dog, Pip, recognizable mainly from the label. And there was me, taller than everyone else, the way moms always are in kids' drawings, with long dark hair he'd gotten exactly right in brown crayon. I almost missed it. Behind me, directly behind me, close, the way a shadow stands, was another figure, not labeled, not given the loose, hurried quality of the rest of the drawing. This figure was colored in slowly, carefully, with a dark purple crayon applied in layered strokes like he'd gone over it again and again, until it was almost black in the center. It was taller than me. No features except a faint oval where a face might be. "Ollie?" I kept my voice light. "Who's this?" He looked at the drawing the way you look at something completely obvious. "That's the one who watches you sleep," he said. Then he asked if the pasta was almost ready. I stood there holding the drawing while the water boiled over behind me. I told myself what any reasonable person tells themselves in that moment, that kids say things, strange, specific, casually unsettling things, delivered without drama and forgotten by morning. Oliver had once informed me, completely unprompted, that our mailbox was sad because nobody ever said thank you to it. He had a rich interior world and absolutely no filter between that world and his mouth. This was the same thing. It had to be the same thing. I put the drawing on the counter, made the pasta, got him bathed and into bed, and listened to him tell me about something that had happened at preschool that I couldn't quite follow, but nodded along to. Kissed his forehead, turned on his nightlight, and then I went back downstairs, and I stood in the kitchen, and I looked at the drawing again. The rain had picked up outside, running in thin streams down the window glass, and the radiator had gone quiet for a moment, the way it sometimes did, just long enough for the house to feel very still. I stood there looking at that careful, dark purple figure standing behind me, looking at how much time he'd spent on it. The layered strokes, the deliberate pressure, the way he'd drawn it close. I folded the drawing and put it in the junk drawer. I don't know why I didn't throw it away. That night I checked the locks on every door before bed. I hadn't done that once since we moved in. 3 days later, he brought me another drawing. This one was of the backyard. Gerald, the maple tree, Pip digging near the fence, a lopsided sun in the corner that he'd given a smiley face to. It was cheerful, sweet. I was halfway through putting it on the fridge before I saw it. The figure was there again, standing at the edge of the yard near the back fence. Same dark purple, same careful layered strokes, same faint oval for a face. If anything, it looked more defined than the first time, like he'd gotten more practiced at drawing it. I set the drawing down on the kitchen table. "Ollie, you drew that person again." He looked up from his cereal, glanced at the drawing. "Yeah." "Why?" He thought about it with the genuine seriousness that 5-year-olds bring to questions adults think are simple. "Because it was there," he said, and went back to his cereal. I didn't push it. I told myself, again, that this was imaginative play, that children conjure companions and presences out of thin air, that it meant nothing. I'd read enough parenting forums in those first sleepless months of single motherhood to know that kids Oliver's age said and drew things that seemed alarming and turned out to be absolutely nothing. I was a woman living alone with her son in a new house after a hard year. I was primed to find threats in places there weren't any. I put the drawing on the fridge anyway. I'm still not sure why. The wake-ups started that week. Not from noise, not from Oliver, not from anything I could name. I'd simply surface from sleep at some point in the small hours, fully, instantly awake, the way you get when something has pulled you up rather than when you've drifted up naturally. I'd lie there in the dark, listening. The house would be quiet except for the rain if it was raining, or the particular thick silence of a dry, cold night if it wasn't. After 10 minutes or so, whatever had woken me would seem to release its grip, and I'd drift back down. It happened 4 times that first week, 5 the next. I mentioned it to a coworker, Dana, who sat across from me and had known me long enough to say honest things. I kept it light. Told her Oliver had been saying weird stuff and it was making me jumpy. Told her about the drawings. She laughed and I laughed with her, and she told me about her nephew who'd spent an entire year insisting there was a wolf who lived inside the family's washing machine and attended his birthday parties. We agreed that children were strange and that I needed more sleep. I drove home that evening feeling better. Told myself the conversation had put it to rest. That night I woke up at 3:17 a.m. I know the exact time because I'd started checking my phone when it happened, logging it in my head the way you do when a pattern starts to feel too consistent to be coincidence. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and the house was so quiet I could hear the rain beginning outside, just a whisper of it against the window glass, barely there, like the night was breathing. I checked on Oliver, habit by that point. He was asleep on his side, one arm hanging off the mattress, Pip curled at his feet. Normal. Safe. I stood in the doorway for a moment longer than I needed to, watching the slow rise and fall of his back, before I went back to bed. It was 2 nights after that when I heard him talking in his sleep. I was still awake, It was past midnight, one of those nights where sleep keeps sliding out of reach, when I caught the sound of his voice through the wall. Not crying, not distressed, just talking, low and conversational, the way you talk to someone sitting right next to you. I went to his room and eased the door open. He was sitting up in bed, eyes closed. His lips were moving. I stood very still and listened. Most of it was indistinct, the mumbled, half-formed speech of a child deep in a dream. But then, clearly, in a voice that was somehow flatter than his usual one, he said, "She can't see you yet." Then he lay back down and was quiet. I didn't sleep again that night. I told myself it was a dream. I told myself children sleep talk and it's common and it doesn't mean anything. I told myself a lot of things, standing in that hallway with my heart going too fast and the rain tapping against the window at the end of the hall like it was trying to get my attention. The drawing on my pillow appeared on a Wednesday. I came upstairs after doing the dishes to find one of Oliver's drawings sitting in the center of my pillow. It was the figure. Just the figure this time. No family around it, no background. Alone on the page, in that deep, careful purple, slightly larger than it had ever been before, facing forward. I went straight to Oliver's room. He was on his bedroom floor building something elaborate out of blocks. "Ollie, did you put a drawing on my pillow?" He looked up. "No." "Are you sure? It's okay if you did." He shook his head, already losing interest, turning back to his blocks. Then, as an afterthought, he glanced back at me over his shoulder. "Maybe it put itself there," he said simply. Then, "Can we have grilled cheese tonight?" I stood in his doorway for a long moment after that. The radiator knocked once, loud, in the silence. Outside, the rain had thickened, drumming steadily on the roof above us, filling the house with white noise that should have felt comforting. It didn't feel comforting anymore. That night I slept with the hall light on for the first time since I was a child. I told myself it was for Oliver. I knew that wasn't true. I called my sister on a Sunday morning while Oliver was watching cartoons. I'd been putting it off for a week, telling myself I had nothing real to report, that I'd sound unhinged, that saying it out loud would make it more real than I wanted it to be. But I'd woken up at 3:17 a.m. again the night before. Fourth time that week. Same time, same instant pull from sleep, same feeling of the room being somehow fuller than it should be. And I was out of ways to dismiss it. My sister Rachel is 4 years older than me, and has always been the one I call when I don't know what else to do. She listened without interrupting while I told her everything. The drawings, the figure in purple, what Oliver said about it watching me sleep, the sleep talking, the drawing on the pillow, the wake-ups, all of it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. I expected her to do what Dana had done, laugh gently, offer a rational explanation, tell me I needed more sleep and less time alone with my thoughts. She didn't laugh. "Mom used to talk about something like this," she said, slowly. "Grandma too, actually. You were probably too young to remember. They called them shadow watchers." She paused. "Grandma said they attached to people, not to houses exactly, to people in houses, where grief has already been living, where something heavy happened." I sat with that for a moment. "I just got divorced, Rachel. I don't think that counts as—" "Not you," she said. "The house. Before you." After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then I opened my laptop and looked up the previous owners. It didn't take long. The house had been listed as an estate sale. I'd known that much when I bought it. Had assumed it meant an elderly owner, natural causes, nothing unusual. What I hadn't looked into was the specifics. A man named Robert Harlan had lived there with his wife for 11 years. He was 54 when he died. Unexpectedly, the obituary said, which is the word people use when there's no comfortable explanation. He'd died in the house. His wife had moved out within the month and never come back. I closed the laptop. The rain outside was steady and gray, running down the kitchen window in thin, crooked lines. The radiator ticked quietly in the corner. This kitchen that I'd come to love, that I'd filled with Oliver's drawings and grocery lists and the smell of coffee every morning, it suddenly felt like a place I was only borrowing, like something else had tenure here that I didn't. I confronted Oliver that afternoon. I'm not proud of how I did it. I sat across from him at the kitchen table and asked him to tell me about the figure in his drawings. I meant to be gentle. I meant to make it feel like a casual conversation. But I'd been running on broken sleep for 2 weeks, and I was scared in a way that had started to feel physical, like a stone sitting permanently behind my sternum. And it came out more intense than I intended. His face shifted, that particular expression children get when they sense an adult is more upset than they're letting on. "It's okay," I said, softer. "I just want to understand. Who is it, buddy?" He looked down at the table, picked at the edge of his placemat. "I'm not supposed to talk about it," he said quietly. "Who told you that?" He shook his head. "Ollie, who told you you're not supposed to talk about it?" He looked up at me then, and something in his expression made my stomach turn. Not fear, exactly. More like the careful look of someone trying to protect someone else. "If I talk about it too much," he said, "it'll know I told you, and then it won't just watch anymore." He slid off his chair and went back to his room. I sat at the table alone and listened to the rain. That night I propped my phone against the lamp on my nightstand, opened the camera, and hit record before I turned the light off. I don't know what I expected. Something to confirm I was losing my mind, maybe. Something to watch back in the morning and laugh at. I was so tired by that point that falling asleep, despite everything, took almost no time at all. I woke at 3:17 a.m. Same time, same sudden, total wakefulness, like a switch thrown. I lay there in the dark and felt my heart doing that thing it had been doing. Not racing, just present, too loud, too aware of itself. After a few minutes, the feeling faded. I picked up my phone and stopped the recording. I almost didn't watch it. I nearly set the phone back down, rolled over, tried to sleep. Something stopped me. I told myself I'd just skim it. 2 hours of footage of a dark room, nothing there, and then I'd feel stupid and sleep well for the first time in weeks. I watched myself lying still in the darkness. The nightlight from the hallway made the room dim gray. Everything quiet. Everything ordinary. Then the timestamp hit 3:17 a.m. I stirred on screen, turned slightly, the way I do when I surface, and behind me, between my body and the headboard, the darkness changed. Not a shadow. A shadow is just the absence of light. This had shape, a density, the slow, deliberate quality of something that was aware of being where it was. It rose as I turned, shifted when I shifted. It was tall enough that it shouldn't have been able to exist in the space between me and the headboard, but it was there, folded into that gap in a way that made no physical sense. For 4 seconds it held its shape. Then it contracted, pulled inward on itself like smoke in reverse, and it was gone. I watched it 4 more times. Hands shaking so badly I kept losing my grip on the phone. A nausea rising in my throat that I had to breathe through slowly. The cold sweat that had broken out across my skin despite the warmth of the room. It was there every time. 4 seconds. Rising when I rose. Present in a way I could not explain and could not unfind now that I'd seen it. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a long time after that. The rain had stopped. The house was completely still. And I understood, for the first time, that I had not been imagining any of it. I woke Oliver at 7 in the morning, packed a bag for each of us in under 15 minutes, and drove to Rachel's. I didn't explain everything to him. Just told him we were going to have a sleepover at Auntie Rachel's, which he received with uncomplicated delight. He asked if he could bring his blocks. I said yes. I didn't look in the rearview mirror once the whole drive there. Rachel met us at the door and took one look at my face and didn't ask any questions. She just made coffee and put cartoons on for Oliver and sat across from me at her kitchen table while I showed her the footage. She watched it 3 times, set the phone down carefully like it was something that needed to be handled gently. Neither of us said anything for a moment. "You're not going back," she said. It wasn't a question. "I have to go back. All of our things are there." "Not tonight." "No," I agreed. "Not tonight." We stayed for 2 nights. Oliver slept soundly, both of them. No sleep talking, no sitting up in the dark murmuring to things I couldn't see. I lay awake both nights anyway, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of Rachel's house settling around me, telling myself I could feel the difference, that whatever had been in our house hadn't followed us here, that Oliver's easy sleep was proof of that. I almost believed it. On the 3rd morning, I told Rachel I needed to go back to get more of our things. Clothes, Oliver's medications, his favorite blanket that I'd forgotten in the rush. She insisted on coming with me. I didn't argue. We went in the early afternoon, when the light was flat and gray, but present. I'd told myself daylight would make it manageable. Walking back through the front door, I understood that had been naive. The house felt exactly the same as it always had, which was somehow worse than if it had felt different. It felt like home. It felt like mine. The refrigerator was still covered in Oliver's drawings. The kitchen still smelled like the candle I'd been burning all October. Gerald the maple tree was still visible through the back window, stripped now of most of his leaves. Something had happened here. Something was here. And it had let me make this place feel like home anyway. We moved quickly. Rachel took the kitchen and living room while I went upstairs, grabbing clothes, Oliver's medications from the bathroom cabinet, the blanket from his bed. I worked fast, not pausing, not letting myself slow down enough to feel the particular quality of the silence up there on the 2nd floor. The way it felt less like quiet and more like held breath. I was almost done when I passed Oliver's room. His art table sat in the corner by the window, the small one we'd found at a garage sale in September, paint-stained and slightly wobbly, that he'd claimed immediately and covered in stickers. His crayon box was open. A piece of paper was on the table. I stopped in the doorway. He'd been with me at Rachel's for 2 nights. He hadn't been in this room. Neither had I. I walked to the table slowly, the way you approach something you already know you don't want to see. The drawing was detailed in a way his work had been getting progressively, unsettlingly more detailed over the past weeks. The house, rendered from the outside, precise enough that I recognized it immediately. The maple tree in the yard, bare-branched, the front path, the windows on the 2nd floor, each one carefully drawn. In one window, my window, the one in my bedroom that faced the street, there was a figure. Not the featureless form from the earlier drawings, not the dark purple shape without definition that I'd been finding on my refrigerator for weeks. This one had a face, 2 dark eyes set close, no other features, just those eyes and the way they were oriented, not looking inward into the house, not looking at anything inside, looking out, facing the street, facing whoever might be standing outside looking up, facing the exact angle from which I had looked up at that window hundreds of times, coming home from work, pulling into the driveway, standing on the front path with grocery bags, pausing to look at Gerald. All those times I had stood outside and looked up at my house. I thought about what might have been, looking back. My hands were shaking. I picked up the drawing anyway. I don't know why. The same inexplicable instinct that had made me put the first one in the junk drawer instead of the bin. And I walked out of that room and down the stairs and out the front door without stopping. Rachel was already outside, loading the last bag into the car. She looked at my face and then at the paper in my hands. "Don't show me," she said. "Just get in." I got in. She drove. I sat with the drawing face down on my lap and looked straight ahead. Halfway to her house, I turned and looked back through the rear window. From that angle, from that distance, I could just make out the second floor of the house as we put space between us. I looked at my bedroom window. The light in there was off. I hadn't turned any lights on when I was inside. The window was dark. I told myself I couldn't see anything in that darkness from this distance. I told myself the shape I thought I could make out was a trick of the flat, gray afternoon light, a reflection, my own fear projecting. I turned back around. I didn't look again. I haven't been back since. We broke the lease in November. It cost me 2 months' rent to do it. Money I didn't really have. Money that stung in the specific way financial hits sting when you're already rebuilding from scratch. I didn't care. I signed the paperwork at Rachel's kitchen table and felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't fully realized had been locked tight for weeks. I called a priest. I'm not particularly religious. Hadn't been inside a church for anything other than a wedding or a funeral in over a decade. But I didn't know who else to call, and Rachel thought it was worth trying. He was a kind man, older, who listened to everything I told him with a patience that felt genuine rather than performative. He offered to visit the house and say prayers over it. I told him I'd already given back the keys. He said he'd pray for it anyway, and for us. I thanked him and meant it. I called a medium, too. I found her through a website that I'd normally have dismissed immediately, but nothing about my judgment felt trustworthy anymore. She spoke to me on the phone for 40 minutes, asked careful questions, and then went quiet for a long moment before she said the house felt, her word, attentive. Like something in it had learned to pay very close attention. She said she didn't think it meant us harm exactly, but that attention of that kind was its own kind of danger. She didn't charge me for the call. I didn't ask why. Neither of them gave me answers. I hadn't really expected them to. Some things don't resolve into explanations. They just become part of the architecture of your life. A room you learn to walk past without opening the door. Oliver has never drawn the figure again. I noticed it gradually. The way you notice an absence rather than a presence. The refrigerator in our new apartment filled up with his drawings the way it always had, and Gerald the maple tree appeared in several of them, which made me feel something complicated I still haven't fully sorted out. But the dark purple figure, the careful layered strokes, the tall shape standing behind me, it stopped appearing the day we left the house on Aldermere Street, and it hasn't come back. I asked him about it once, maybe 3 months after we'd moved. We were driving home from school, and I kept my voice as casual as I could manage. "Hey, Ollie, do you remember the person you used to draw? The purple one?" He was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the passing street. "Yeah," he said. "Do you ever think about it?" "No," he said. Then, after a pause, "It stayed in the house. It didn't want to come with us." He said it the way he says most things, plainly, with total confidence, as though reporting something factual rather than something impossible. Then he asked if we could stop for hot chocolate on the way home. I pulled into the next drive-thru and bought him the largest size they had. I still record myself sleeping sometimes. Not every night, the way I did in those first terrified weeks after. Maybe once a month. Maybe when the weather turns cold and the radiator in our new place starts its seasonal knocking, and something in me goes briefly sideways with memory. I always watch it back in the morning, always in daylight, always with my coffee already made. The footage is always unremarkable. Dark room, sleeping woman, ordinary shadows that stay where shadows are supposed to stay. I still wake up sometimes at 3 a.m. Not every night, not even every week, but often enough that I know it hasn't entirely left me. Whatever that month did to my nervous system, whatever groove it wore into my sleep. I wake up and I lie still and I listen to the apartment around me, to Oliver breathing through the wall, to the street sounds from outside. I reach for my phone and check the time, and some nights the number on the screen is 3:17, and some nights it isn't, and I'm not sure anymore which one I find more unsettling. I think about the family that moved into the house after us sometimes, whether they have children, whether those children like to draw. I've thought about reaching out, leaving some kind of note, some warning, and I never have, because I don't know what I'd say. I have a 4-second video of a darkness that moved. I have a drawing made by a 5-year-old while he was 10 miles away sleeping in his aunt's spare room. I have the memory of standing in that kitchen looking at a crayon figure colored in with such careful, deliberate attention that it looked almost like love. None of that is something you can put in a letter. What I know is this. Oliver is 6 now, gap-toothed still, wildly optimistic still, the kind of kid who names trees and worries about the feelings of mailboxes. He draws constantly. The fridge is covered. There are dogs that look like clouds and dinosaurs in grocery stores and portraits of Gerald in various moods. He draws me in all of them. Tall, dark-haired, recognizable. Always alone behind me. And every single time I take one of his drawings down from the fridge to make room for the new one, I turn it over and check the back before I throw it away. I don't know exactly what I'm looking for. I think I'm checking that there's nothing on the other side that shouldn't be there. So far, there never is. I'm one of the lucky ones. I know that. I got out, I took my son, and whatever was in that house stayed in that house the way Oliver said it would. But I check. Every time. I'll probably check for the rest of my life. The babysitter called me crying. Someone had been tapping on the kid's window from outside, and we live on the 2nd floor. I remember checking my phone at 8:47 p.m. and thinking, this is a good night. My husband Dale and I were at a work dinner downtown. One of those low-key company things where the food is actually decent and nobody talks about spreadsheets. I had a glass of white wine in front of me, a half-eaten piece of salmon, and that particular kind of quiet contentment you feel when everything is, for once, just fine. The kids were home. The kids were safe. Kira was with them. That was the thought I kept coming back to. Kira was with them. She'd been babysitting for us since my oldest, Noah, was 4 years old. He was 8 now, and my youngest, Lily, had just turned 5 in September. Kira lived 3 houses down, the Delancey's daughter. And she was 19, responsible in that old soul way some teenagers just are. She knew our house better than some of our actual family members. She knew that Lily needed her nightlight left on and the closet door open exactly halfway. She knew that Noah would try to negotiate an extra 30 minutes of screen time, and that the answer was always no, but delivered kindly. She knew where we kept the spare key, the first aid kit, and the good snacks we hid from the kids on the top shelf behind the rice. I trusted her completely. That matters for what comes next. Our house is a 2-story colonial in a quiet cul-de-sac, the kind of neighborhood where people still wave from their driveways, and the biggest drama is whose leaf blower starts too early on a Sunday. We'd lived there 6 years. The backyard backs up to a stretch of older trees, mostly oak, and in the spring and summer, they're beautiful, full, and green. The kind of trees that make you feel like you made the right choice, buying a house. The kids' bedroom faces that backyard. There's a wide window seat in there that Noah and Lily had claimed as their reading spot. A little cushioned ledge where they'd curl up on weekends with books and stuffed animals and argue quietly about whose turn it was to sit in the corner with the good pillow. It had been raining lightly since around 6 that evening. Not a storm, just that steady, soft autumn rain that turns everything outside into a gray watercolor and makes the inside feel warmer by comparison. I remember hearing it against the restaurant windows and thinking it was the kind of night you want to drive home slow, maybe make tea, maybe watch something easy on the couch. Dale was in the middle of a story about something that happened at the office. I wasn't even really listening, just nodding and smiling, the wine doing its job, when my phone lit up on the table. Kira. I almost let it go to voicemail. We had a rule about phones at dinner, even casual dinners, even dinners that didn't really count. But something made me pick it up. Some small, instinctive flicker I couldn't have named in the moment. I'd think about that instinct a lot in the weeks that followed. I answered. The first thing I noticed was that she wasn't talking at a normal volume. The second thing I noticed was that she was trying very hard not to cry. Kira. I kept my voice even. What's going on? A pause. The kind that has weight to it. Okay, so I don't want you to freak out, she said, which is of course the single fastest way to make someone freak out. It's probably nothing. I didn't know if I should call. It's fine. Talk to me. She'd put the kids to bed around 8. Noah first, then Lily, the usual routine. Teeth brushed, nightlight on, closet door open the right amount. She'd come back downstairs, made herself some tea, turned on something on the TV. Normal night. The rain was steady against the windows. The house was quiet, and she was maybe 20 minutes from texting me the all clear and settling in for the evening. Then she heard it. Tapping. Coming from upstairs. It was soft at first, she said. Like, you know when a branch hits glass? Kind of that sound. I figured it was just the weather, the wind picking up. I waited a few minutes and it stopped, so I let it go. I told her that made sense. Branches, wind, old houses making their noises in the rain. Our house had a full repertoire of complaints. The radiator that knocked on cold nights, the third stair that groaned under any weight above 90 pounds, the side door that swelled in the damp and needed a shoulder to open properly. I believed every word I was saying. I wanted to believe every word I was saying. I went up to check on them anyway, she continued. Just to peek in. They were both asleep. Lily had kicked her blanket off. I tucked her back in. The window looked fine. Nothing there. So I went back downstairs. She stopped. Kira. It started again, she said quietly. About 10 minutes later. And it was different this time. I set my wine glass down. Across the table, Dale caught my expression and went still. Different, she said, was the word she kept coming back to. The first time had been irregular, patternless, the way weather sounds, the way wind sounds, random and without intention. The second time was slower, evenly spaced. 3 taps, a pause, 3 taps, a pause. Like someone testing something, like someone making sure they were heard. She'd gone back upstairs, stood outside the kids' door for a moment, listening. The tapping stopped as she reached the top of the stairs, and she told herself, again, that it was nothing, that she was scaring herself, that she was about to feel very stupid when she opened that door and saw a branch swaying against the glass. She opened the door. Both kids still asleep. Window dark, rain-streaked. The backyard beyond it just blackness and the faint, wet outline of trees. And then she looked more carefully. Something moved, she said, right at the bottom of the window. Like something dropped. Fast. And then it was just gone. The hair on the back of my neck stood up so suddenly it was almost painful. What do you mean, dropped? I don't know how to explain it better than that. Something was there, and then it wasn't. Her voice had gone very careful, very controlled. The voice of someone who is frightened and trying not to show it to the children sleeping 5 feet away. I stood there for a while just looking. I didn't see anything else. But I kept thinking about how the tapping sounded, and I couldn't make myself go back downstairs. I was already reaching for Dale's arm. Here is what I told myself in that moment, because I think it's important to be honest about this. I told myself there was an explanation. A bird, maybe. Some large bird startled off the ledge, or a squirrel. We had squirrels in the yard constantly, fat and brazen, and the oak trees came close to the house in places. Something had been on the window ledge, and Kira had scared it off when she turned on the light. That was the story I was building, quietly and quickly, because the other story, the one my gut was already drafting, was not one I was ready to look at directly. "The oak trees," I said. "There's one that runs close to the east side of the house. A branch could have—" "There's no branch near that window." Her voice was flat, not argumentative, just certain. "I looked. There's nothing near it that could reach. I'm standing right here looking at it, and there's nothing." The bottom dropped out of my stomach. Dale was already pushing back from the table. "Kira, listen to me." My voice was steady in a way that surprised me, some autopilot calm that kicked in when the rest of me was anything but. "I want you to go get the kids. Don't wake them up if you don't have to. Just pick them up, carry them if you need to. Take them to our room. Lock the door behind you." "Okay." A breath. "Okay, yeah. Don't turn on any lights that face the backyard. Just the hallway light." "You're scaring me." "I know. I'm sorry. It's probably nothing." The words came out of my mouth, and I didn't believe a single one of them. "But let's just be cautious, okay? We're already getting our things together. We'll be home soon." I heard her moving, quiet footsteps on the hardwood, the soft sounds of a child being lifted, Lily making that small, unconscious noise she makes when she's disturbed in sleep, like a question with no words. My throat tightened. I kept the phone to my ear and signaled to Dale with my eyes, and he was already standing, already reaching for his jacket, already reading everything he needed to read in my face. We didn't say goodbye to anyone. We just left. Outside, the rain had picked up. It drummed on the roof of the car in thick, heavy sheets as Dale pulled out of the parking lot, and I sat in the passenger seat with my phone pressed against my cheek, listening to Kira settle the kids into our bedroom, listening to her lock the door with that small, decisive click, listening to the rain on her end of the call beating against our house 25 minutes away. It was the rain that unsettled me more than anything, in a way I couldn't fully articulate. All evening it had been a backdrop, pleasant and soft, the kind of sound I'd always found comforting. Now it felt like something else, like cover, like the specific sound you'd want in the background if you were trying very hard not to be heard. I stared out the windshield at the wet black road unspooling ahead of us and tried to remember the last time I'd felt this particular kind of afraid, the kind that isn't loud or frantic but cold and very quiet, settling into your chest like water finding its level. I told myself, 25 minutes, just 25 minutes. Then Kira called back. Her voice, when I answered, had changed. Whatever composure she'd been holding on to had cracked open at the edges. She wasn't crying. She was past crying, into something more concentrated and still. "There's something on the roof," she whispered. The car swerved slightly as Dale glanced at me. I pressed the phone harder against my ear. "Say that again." "Above the bedroom, I can hear. There are footsteps. Someone is walking on the roof." I remember the exact sensation in my hands at that moment. Not shaking, not yet, just a sudden, profound weakness, like the bones had gone soft. I pressed my palm flat against my thigh to steady it. "How many kids? Are they both with you?" The question came out fractured, and I didn't care. I just needed to hear her say it. "They're both here. They're right here with me. Noah woke up. He's asking what's happening." A muffled sound, her hand over the phone, her voice going gentle for one moment. "It's okay, bud. Mom's on the phone. We're just waiting for them to get home." Then back to me, quieter. The footsteps stopped. Silence on her end. Just rain. "Kira." "Wait," she breathed. "Wait, I think..." And then, the handle just moved. I don't remember telling Dale. I must have. He heard something, reacted somehow, because the next thing I knew he was doing 90 on a wet highway with the hazards off and both hands white-knuckle tight on the wheel. I had his phone in my left hand, dialing 911, and my own phone in my right pressed against my ear. And I was doing that thing where your brain splits into two separate tracks. One that is calm and functional and saying the right words to the dispatcher, and one that is screaming. "Someone is in my house," I told the dispatcher. "My children are inside. My babysitter is inside. There is someone on the roof, and they just tried the door handle." The dispatcher was good, calm, methodical, asking for the address. I gave it, asked how many individuals. I said I didn't know. She said units were being dispatched, estimated 8 minutes. 8 minutes. I switched back to Kira. "Talk to me," I said. "Keep talking to me." It stopped. Her voice was barely above a breath. The handle, it turned and then stopped. Like they felt the lock and then just stopped. "Are the kids okay?" "Noah's holding Lily. They're in the corner by the closet." A pause. "He's being so good. He's not even crying." My 8-year-old son in the corner of my bedroom holding his 5-year-old sister in the dark while something tried the door from the other side. I pressed my fist against my mouth for exactly 1 second, and then I put it back in my lap, and I kept my voice level because the only thing I could do for them right now, the only thing, was not fall apart. "You're doing great," I told her. "The police are 8 minutes out. We're maybe 12. Just stay on the phone with me." Silence. Rain on the roof of the car, rain against the windshield, Dale pushing the car faster than I'd ever seen him drive. The wipers beat back and forth in that frantic double-time rhythm, and I watched the road and listened to my house breathe through the phone. Then Kira made a sound I'd never heard from her before, not a scream, something smaller and more terrible than a scream. A sharp inhale cut short. "The bathroom," she whispered. "What about it?" "The window. In the master bath. Someone is trying the window." My stomach dropped completely. The master bathroom adjoined our bedroom, separated by a single interior door with a push-button lock, the kind that takes about 4 seconds to pop with a flathead screwdriver. We'd always meant to replace it. We'd never replaced it. Whoever this was knew the layout. That was the thought I couldn't shake loose. Standing on my roof in the rain, trying a second-floor window, moving to the bathroom when the bedroom door didn't open. This wasn't someone stumbling around in the dark. This was someone who had thought about it, someone who had looked at our house and made a plan. "Kira," my voice dropped low. "The bathroom door, is it locked?" I don't know. I didn't think to. "Can you lock it from where you are without going near it?" "No, it's across the room." I heard it then, faintly, through the phone. A soft, persistent sound, rhythmic and patient. The bathroom window being worked, testing the frame, looking for give. "Lock it," I said. "Go right now, fast, lock it, and get back to the kids." I heard her move. 4 steps across the room, the small mechanical click of the push-button lock. 4 steps back. Okay. Breathing hard now. Okay, it's locked. Good, good. Now push something against it. The hamper, anything heavy. More movement. A scraping sound. Kira's breathing in short, controlled bursts, trying to stay quiet, trying to stay functional. I heard Noah ask something in a small voice, and Kira murmur back to him, and I heard Lily say one word clearly through the phone, a single syllable, barely audible, and it was Mommy. Something broke open in my chest. I pressed on it, closed it back down. 14 minutes, Dale said. Not to me, not to anyone. Just saying it out loud like a math problem he was trying to solve. 8 minutes for the police, I said back. 8 minutes, Kira. The working sound at the bathroom window stopped. Silence. 30 seconds of it. 40. The rain filled every inch of the quiet, drumming on the roof, running in sheets down the gutters, and I sat in that car, and I counted, and I breathed, and I watched the miles tick down on the dashboard GPS. Then the working sound started again, lower this time. A different register. Not the window anymore. I couldn't identify it immediately. Kira heard it too. I could tell by the way her breathing changed, going very shallow, very still. We both just listened. The sound was subtle, patient, almost methodical. A soft, repetitive pressure, like something being tested, like someone who has done this before and knows that the right amount of steady force will eventually find the weak point in anything. "What is that?" Kira breathed. Not a question. She knew I didn't have the answer. And then I did have the answer, because I knew that door. I'd had it open 1,000 times, pushing through it still half asleep on my way to the bathroom at 2 in the morning. And I knew exactly how the frame sat and exactly what it sounded like when someone applied pressure to it from the other side. "He's pushing on the bathroom door," I said. Very quietly, very clearly. Kira didn't respond. "Kira." "I know," she said. "I know. I can feel it." She'd moved back to the corner with the kids. I understood then that she'd put herself between the bathroom door and Noah and Lily without being asked, without being told, without thinking about it. She'd just done it, the way you do when something in your bones has made the decision before your brain gets a vote. 3 minutes for the police. Dale took the exit ramp at 65. The pushing sound stopped, then started again. Stopped. I heard something shift in the door frame, a small wooden complaint, a give that had no business being there, and Kira made that sound again, the small cut-off inhale, and for one long, terrible moment, the only thing in the world was the rain and the sound of my family on the other side of a phone and the miles between us that I could not close fast enough. Then, distant, faint, growing, sirens. Kira heard them first. "I hear them," she said, and her voice finally cracked. "I can hear them." The pressure on the bathroom door stopped, just stopped, like a switch thrown, like a decision made. Silence. Then nothing but the rain. We pulled onto our street at 9:31 p.m. There were 2 squad cars in the driveway, lights strobing blue and white against the wet pavement, against the house, against the faces of a few neighbors who'd come to their doorways in the rain to look. The whole scene had that terrible unreality of something you've imagined 100 times in your worst moments and prayed you'd never actually see. Our house. Our driveway. Police tape not yet up, but the posture of the officers suggesting it was being considered. Dale had the car in park before it fully stopped. I was already out. An officer met me at the edge of the lawn, young, steady, hand out to slow me down. "Ma'am, the house has been cleared. Your children are safe. Your babysitter is safe." I heard the words. They landed somewhere slightly outside of me, like something I'd process later. "I need to see them." "You will. Just one moment." "I need to see my children right now." He stepped aside. Kira was on the front porch with Noah and Lily, a second officer nearby, a blanket around her shoulders that someone had produced from somewhere. She had Lily on her hip, my daughter's face buried in her neck, her small fists gripping Kira's collar with that fierce animal grip exhausted children have. Noah stood pressed against Kira's side with his arms around her waist, and he was looking out at the yard with this expression I'd never seen on him before, and hoped to God I never see again. Alert and still and old in a way that 8-year-olds should not be old. I crossed the porch in 3 steps. I don't remember exactly what happened in the next few minutes. I remember the weight of both of them against me. I remember the wet grass smell on Noah's hair and Lily saying "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy" in that repetitive, exhausted way. And I remember Dale's arms coming around all of us from behind and the sound he made, just one short sound, low and broken, that I've never heard from him before or since. Kira stood just outside our huddle. When I finally looked up at her, her eyes were red and her hands were shaking. "You did everything right," I told her. "You hear me? Everything." She nodded once and looked away fast. I think she was afraid that if someone was kind to her, she'd stop holding it together. I understood that completely. The senior officer, a woman, mid-40s, with the kind of face that has seen most things, walked me through what they'd found while Dale took the kids inside. They'd swept the yard first, then the exterior of the house, then the roof. No one was there by the time they arrived. Whoever it was had gone the moment the sirens became audible, which meant they'd been listening for exactly that, which meant they were calm enough and experienced enough to have an exit already planned. They'd found boot prints on top of the backyard fence, fresh impressions in the soft wood, the kind left by someone pulling themselves up and over. On the sloped section of the lower roof above the kitchen, 2 clear prints in the wet shingles, pointing toward the upper roofline. On the ledge outside the children's bedroom window, a partial print and 2 long streak marks, like someone had crouched there for a period of time and shifted their weight. She said a period of time, and I asked her what that meant, and she said it was hard to know exactly, but the impressions were deeper than a brief visit would leave. He had been crouching outside my children's window, in the rain, waiting. We also found something at the base of the oak tree, she said, and something in her tone made me go still. In the grass, partially hidden by the roots. She pulled out her phone, showed me a photograph. Do you recognize this? It was small, rectangular, a handheld mirror, the kind with a telescoping handle, the kind used to see around corners or under things. Black metal, utilitarian, no markings, the kind of thing you'd find at a hardware store or an automotive shop. I stared at it for a long time. No, I said. That's not ours. She put the phone away. She didn't say anything else about it immediately, just made a note, and I stood there in my front yard in the rain and turned the implications of that object over in my mind like a stone with something living under it. A mirror for seeing around corners. Left at the base of the tree he'd used to climb up to my children's window, not dropped in a hurry, not forgotten accidentally. It had been placed near the roots, tucked partially out of sight, as though it had a spot, as though it lived there. He had been here before tonight. That was the only conclusion that made any sense, and once it arrived, I couldn't make it leave. He hadn't picked our house at random. He hadn't climbed a second-floor wall on a rainy night on impulse. He had come here, in daylight probably, and stood at the base of that oak tree, and used that mirror to study the angle, to see what the window looked like from the ground, to figure out how to reach it. He had planned this. He had planned my children. The officer was saying something about canvassing the neighborhood, about filing a report, about motion sensor lighting and secondary locks and follow-up calls. I heard all of it and understood none of it. I was standing in the rain outside my house, and I was thinking about how many times I'd looked at that oak tree and felt glad it was there. They never caught him. I want to be straightforward about that, because I know it's the thing people ask first. The police canvassed the neighborhood for 2 days. They pulled footage from a doorbell camera 3 houses down that showed a figure in a dark jacket moving along the back fence line around 8:15 p.m., 40 minutes before Kira's first call. The footage was grainy, shot at an angle, mostly useless. The figure was average height, average build, face angled away from the camera as though they knew exactly where it was pointed. The case stayed open. It still is, as far as I know. Nobody ever called us with news. Nobody ever knocked on our door with answers. The oak tree came down the following week. Dale hired someone the Monday after it happened, and I stood at the kitchen window and watched them work through the whole thing. The chainsaw, the ropes, the careful sectioned falling. It took most of the morning. When the last piece was down, I felt something I hadn't expected, something that surprised me with its force, grief. Not for the tree, exactly, for what it had been before. For every afternoon I'd watched the kids press their faces to that window seat and point at the squirrels moving through its branches, and for the fact that that particular innocent version of our backyard was gone now, cleared away with the sawdust and the wood chips, and wasn't ever coming back. Dale put his hand on my shoulder. Neither of us said anything. We had every window and door sensor in the house replaced that same week. A security company came and walked the entire perimeter, identified every conceivable access point, every low-hanging roof line, every climbable surface, every shadow the exterior lights didn't reach. We had floodlights installed. We had the push-button lock on the master bathroom replaced with a deadbolt. We had a conversation with both kids, age-appropriate and careful, about what to do and who to trust if something ever felt wrong again. Noah listened with that same still, old expression he'd had on the porch. He nodded when we finished. He didn't ask many questions. That scared me more than the questions would have. Kira moved to college in January. She sent us a card at Christmas, a real card, handwritten, the kind teenagers don't usually send. And in it, she said she thought about us often, and that she hoped we were all okay, and that she was doing well, but that some nights were harder than others. I read that line 4 times. I wrote back immediately, a longer letter than I usually write, and I told her what I'd meant on the porch that night, that she had saved my children, and that I would not forget that, and that some nights being harder than others was not weakness. It was just the correct response to something that should never have happened. She deserved to hear that. I hope she believed it. The mirror is the thing that stays with me. Not the footsteps on the roof, not the door handle turning, not the sound of the bathroom frame beginning to give. Those things are frightening in the way that sudden, loud sounds are frightening. They spike and fade, arriving in the small hours and then receding when morning comes. But the mirror sits differently. The mirror doesn't spike. It just stays. Because the mirror means he was patient. It means he stood at the base of that tree on some ordinary afternoon, maybe a Tuesday, maybe a Sunday, maybe while my kids were visible in that window seat with their books and their stuffed animals, and he looked up at that window and he thought carefully about how to reach it. He came prepared. He came with a plan and a tool, and the particular kind of stillness that belongs to someone who has learned to wait. I don't know who he was. I don't know why he chose us. I don't know if he's done this before, or if he's done it since, or if somewhere out there another family is lying awake, reconstructing the same terrible geometry of angles and access points, and asks themselves the same question I still ask on the nights when sleep doesn't come easily. What did he want with my children? We live in the same house. I sometimes get asked if we moved, and the honest answer is that we thought about it, seriously, for about 6 months. But this is where my kids go to school. This is where their friends are. This is where they know the streets and the neighbors and the way home. I refused to let him take that from them too. So we stayed, and we adjusted, and most days are genuinely fine. But I check the tree line before I turn out the bedroom light. Every night, without exception, I cross to the window and I look out at the backyard and I take a careful inventory of the shadows. It takes maybe 10 seconds. I've done it every single night for the last 3 years, and I will never again hear rain on a roof without listening, really listening, to make absolutely sure that's all it is. My niece said the man in the hallway told her not to tell me he was there. She thought it was a game. My niece was 6 years old that weekend, and she had recently discovered the concept of cozy. She used the word constantly. The blanket was cozy. The hot chocolate was cozy. My apartment, she announced from the doorway, dragging her little overnight bag across the threshold, was the coziest place in the whole entire world. I had to agree with her. This was October 2022. A Friday evening, and my sister had dropped Lily off around 5 o'clock before she and her husband left for their anniversary trip upstate. 2 nights, just the 2 of us, me and my favorite person. I was 29, living alone in a 2-bedroom apartment in a brick building that had probably been standing since the 70s. Old radiators, tall windows, hardwood floors that creaked in certain spots I'd memorized like a map. It wasn't fancy, but I'd made it mine over the 4 years I'd lived there. Lily dropped her bag, kicked off her shoes in completely the wrong direction, and immediately climbed onto my couch like she owned it. I ordered pizza. We watched 2 episodes of her current cartoon obsession, something about a dog that solved mysteries, which she explained to me in exhausting detail even as it played. Rain had started sometime around 6, soft and steady against the windows, and I'd cracked one open just enough to let the sound in. Lily liked that. She'd told me once that rain sounded like the world was whispering, which was the most poetic thing a first grader had ever said to me. Dinner, then a bath, then the drawn-out negotiations of bedtime. Lily wanted 3 stories. We compromised on 2. By 8:30, she was in the spare room, buried under approximately every blanket I owned, the sound of rain doing exactly what I'd hoped, pulling her gently under. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her. There is something about a sleeping child that settles you straight down to your bones. The apartment felt full in a way it usually didn't. Warm. Back in the living room, I poured myself a glass of wine, pulled my own blanket over my legs, and found something on TV I'd been meaning to watch for weeks. The rain had steadied into that even, rhythmic pattern that blurs the line between awake and asleep, the kind of sound that makes the whole world feel very small and very safe. I was relaxed, completely, entirely relaxed. That is the thing I keep coming back to when I think about that night. How safe I felt, how certain I was that everything was fine. I got up around 9:30 to get a glass of water from the kitchen. The apartment had that particular quiet that only happens when a child is asleep in it, different from regular quiet, somehow more settled. I padded down the hallway in my socks, past the linen closet, past Lily's door, into the kitchen. That was when I noticed the hallway light was off. I stood there for a second, glass in hand, staring at the dark stretch of corridor behind me. I always left that light on when Lily was sleeping, a habit from the first time I babysat her, when she'd woken up disoriented and scared in the dark. I was certain I'd turned it on. I could picture myself doing it. But the hallway was dark. I told myself I must have forgotten. I was tired. I'd had half a glass of wine. I'd simply forgotten. I reached back and clicked it on. Then I went to the living room, pulled my blanket back over my legs, and tried to find my place in the show. I didn't quite manage it. The show was good. I know that, objectively, because I'd heard people talk about it for months. But I couldn't sink into it the way I normally would. Keep finding myself glancing toward the hallway. Keep listening past the dialogue, past the rain, for something I couldn't name. I turned the volume up a little. That helped. For about 10 minutes, it helped. I finished my wine, set the glass on the coffee table, and pulled the blanket tighter. Outside, the rain had shifted, heavier now, drumming against the window ledge in uneven bursts as the wind picked up. The old building groaned somewhere above me, that deep settling sound that used to startle me when I first moved in and now barely registered. I told myself that's what I'd been hearing. Old buildings talk. Everyone who lives in one knows that. I was almost convinced. Then, during a quiet scene in the show, one of those moments where the music drops out and the dialogue goes low, I heard it. A shuffle, not from outside, not from the ceiling, from the direction of the hallway. I muted the TV before I even decided to, sat completely still, every muscle in my body locked, head tilted toward that dark corridor just beyond the living room entrance. The rain filled the silence, wind against glass, the radiator ticking and hissing the way it always did this time of year. Nothing else. Nothing that could be called a footstep, or a breath, or a person. 30 seconds, maybe a full minute. Nothing. I let out a long, slow breath. Could have been the building. Could have been Lily shifting in bed. Sound carried strangely in that apartment, bounced off the old walls in ways I'd never fully figured out. Could have been anything. I unmuted the show and pressed on, but I didn't turn the volume back up. At some point, I think it was close to 10:30, I decided I needed to check on Lily. I told myself it was routine, that I always checked on her before I went to bed, which was true. I didn't let myself examine the other reason. I just got up, padded back down the hallway with my hand trailing along the wall, and pushed open the spare room door. She was exactly as I'd left her. A small shape under an enormous pile of blankets, one arm thrown out to the side, breathing slow and even. Her mouth was slightly open. Her hair was a disaster. She looked so completely and totally fine that I felt a rush of something almost like embarrassment, standing there in the dark, heart going a little too fast, checking on a 6-year-old who was obviously, peacefully, deeply asleep. I pulled her blanket up over her shoulder and backed out of the room. On my way back down the hallway, I passed the front door and something made me stop. I don't know what it was exactly. Some shift in the air, maybe, or just the anxiety I was already carrying, looking for somewhere to land. But I stopped, and I looked at the door, and I stood there for a long moment trying to figure out what I was actually seeing. The chain was on. I could see it clearly. The little brass slider sitting in its track, the chain itself hanging in a loose arc across the gap. Locked, everything locked, but the chain was moving, barely. Just a faint, slow sway, like something had disturbed it very recently and the motion hadn't quite died out yet. I stared at it. The sway was so subtle I started to wonder if I was imagining it, if the anxiety had gotten into my eyes and was making me see things that weren't there. I watched until it went still. Then I stood there another minute, watching it stay still. The AC unit. I almost said it out loud. The vent was right above the door. I'd noticed before how it could push air in strange directions, send papers sliding off the counter, make curtains shift for no reason. Of course it could move a chain. Of course. I went back to the couch. I did not finish the show. I sat there with the TV on and the volume low, not really watching, just occupying myself with the light and noise of it while my brain quietly, persistently refused to let go. The rational part of me was running down the list. Old building, AC vent, wine, tired, overactive imagination. Perfectly normal checklist for a person sitting alone in an apartment on a rainy night. Nothing on that list was alarming. Nothing on that list required action. But there is a part of the brain that operates below all of that. Below logic, below language, below the careful internal voice that says you're being ridiculous. It doesn't make arguments. It doesn't explain itself. It just sits at the base of your skull and hums, low and constant, and no amount of reasoning makes it stop. Mine was humming. Around 11, I got up to use the bathroom. Simple, routine. I'd done it 1,000 times in that apartment. Down the hallway, second door on the left. The hallway light was on. I made a point of noticing that, of confirming it to myself. On. I'd turned it on. It was on. Past the linen closet on my left, stopped. The door wasn't fully closed. I know exactly how I keep that closet. Closed, always. Not because I'm obsessive about it, but because the latch is slightly stiff and you have to push it deliberately to get it to catch. So when it's open, you know, because you'd have had to work to close it. The door was standing open about 2 inches, just enough that I could see the dark gap between the door and the frame, just enough that I couldn't see what was inside. My hand was on it before I'd fully decided to move. Pushed it open in one motion, fast, because I knew if I did it slowly I'd lose my nerve. Coats, boxes, the folded spare sheets on the top shelf, the vacuum cleaner I never used tucked in the corner. Everything exactly where it always was. Nothing behind the coats when I pushed them aside, hangers scraping on the rail, my own breath too loud in the small space. I stood there looking at it for a long moment. Then I reached in, pushed the door firmly from the inside until I felt the latch catch with a clean click and stepped back. Standing in the hallway, in the quiet, with the rain coming down steadily outside and the radiator ticking behind the bathroom wall, I had a very clear, very honest conversation with myself. I asked, "Is something wrong?" And I didn't know. That was the problem. Not yes, not no, just this persistent, low-grade wrongness I couldn't locate or name or prove. A hallway light I might have forgotten to turn on. A chain that might have been moved by a vent. A closet door that might have swung open on its own because the latch was old and the building shifted, and 100 other explanations that were all completely plausible and none of which made the humming stop. I thought about calling someone. My sister was upstate, 3 hours away, already asleep probably. My friend Danny would answer, but what would I say? The closet was open, I think. I'd feel stupid before I finished the sentence. I thought about calling the building's front desk, except my building didn't have a front desk, and even if it did, what would I report? A feeling? You don't call anyone over a feeling. So I used the bathroom, washed my hands, looked at myself in the mirror for a moment, and looked, I have to say, completely normal. Tired, a little pale maybe, but normal. A woman in her pajamas at 11 o'clock on a rainy Friday who had talked herself into a state over nothing. Perfectly normal. Back in the living room, I turned the TV off, sat in the quiet for exactly as long as it took me to decide I didn't like the quiet, and then turned it back on. Set a sleep timer for an hour, pulled the blanket over my legs, stared at the ceiling, listened to the rain. Eventually, slowly, reluctantly, my body started to believe what my brain had been arguing all night. Nothing was wrong. I was tired and jumpy and alone, and that was the whole story. The warmth of the apartment crept back in around the edges. The sound of rain against glass did what it always did, found the places where I was wound tight and worked on them, patient and steady. My eyes were heavy. I was almost asleep when I heard Lily's feet on the hallway floor, that specific small-footed pad that I recognized immediately. And then she appeared in the living room doorway, blanket dragging behind her, hair worse than ever, squinting against the light. "Hey, Bug," I said, sitting up. "Can't sleep?" She shuffled over and climbed up next to me, burrowing under my blanket without asking, which was so completely her that I almost laughed. "I was asleep," she said, "but something woke me up." I pulled her closer instinctively, the way you do, tucked her under my arm, felt the warm, solid weight of her against my side. "Yeah?" I kept my voice light, easy. "What woke you up? A dream?" She considered this with the grave seriousness that 6-year-olds bring to questions they find slightly insulting. "No, not a dream. A noise." "What kind of noise?" She shrugged, a Lily shrug, one shoulder barely, the universal signal that the question was beneath her, like a walking noise, in the hallway. The hum at the base of my skull went from a low frequency to something sharper, something with edges. I did not move. I did not change the way I was holding her. I kept my eyes on the television, still playing, still murmuring. And I said very carefully, "Probably just the building bug. This place makes all kinds of sounds at night." "I know," she said. But then I woke up and I looked at the door and there was a man. The world tilted. Not dramatically, not like in a movie where something crashes and the music swells, just tilted. Went a few degrees sideways in a way I felt somewhere deep behind my eyes. I was aware of my own heartbeat in a way I hadn't been a second ago, aware of the exact position of my hands, my feet, the distance between me and the hallway. I breathed in through my nose, out through my mouth, slowly. "A man," I said, not a question. Just the words, coming out flat and even. "Mm-hmm." She reached over and pulled a loose thread on the blanket, examining it, completely unbothered. In her world, this was already a fully processed event, filed and done with. He was standing by my door, in the hallway part. What did he look like, Lily? She thought about it, scrunched her nose the way she did when she was trying to remember something accurately. "I couldn't really see. It was kind of dark. He was just tall, standing there." My mouth was dry. "Did he say anything to you?" And here, right here, is the part I have replayed so many times that I could write it word for word, inflection for inflection, the exact untroubled tone of a child reporting a mildly interesting thing that happened. "He said it was a secret game," she said. "He said, 'Don't tell you he was there.'" I stopped breathing, just for a second, just long enough for the full weight of it to land, to understand exactly what those two sentences meant, what they revealed about intent, about awareness, about the fact that whoever had been standing at the end of my hallway had looked at my niece's face and made a calculation, keep her quiet, and then done it, successfully. She'd climbed out of bed, walked down the hall, burrowed into my side, and not said a word until I asked, because he told her not to, because he told her it was a game. "Lily," I kept my voice so steady I still don't fully understand how. "When you saw the man, Was that before you came to get me? Or a different time? She tipped her head. Before. I woke up and he was there, and then he went away, and then I came to get you. He went away, I repeated. Did you see where he went? Back that way. She gestured, vaguely, toward the far end of the hallway, toward the front door, toward the linen closet, toward the stretch of corridor I had walked down twice that night, alone, in the dark, convincing myself there was nothing there. My hands were in my lap, and I pressed them flat against my thighs because they had started to shake, a fine internal trembling that hadn't reached the surface yet, but would if I let it. I could feel it trying to climb. I pressed it down. Lily was leaning against me, already getting heavy again, already drifting back toward sleep the way young children can, even in the middle of conversations that are quietly destroying their adults. She could not see my face right now. I was grateful for that. I was thinking about the chain on the front door, moving, the slow arc of it, that barely there sway that I had explained away in 30 seconds flat because I needed it to be nothing. I was thinking about the linen closet, the 2-inch gap, the darkness inside that I'd pushed away with one fast motion and then sealed and walked away from. I was thinking about the shuffle I'd heard during the quiet scene in the show, not the building, not Lily shifting in bed, but something that had been in the hallway at that exact moment and gone still when I went still. I was thinking about the fact that I'd been in this apartment all night, separated from whatever this was by one thin corridor, and I had almost gone to sleep. The rain drummed against the windows. Hard now, the kind of rain that swallows sound, that could cover a footstep or a door or a breath without trying. I had loved that sound 3 hours ago, sat under a blanket and let it pull me towards sleep like a hand at my back, warm and gentle. Right now, I hated it. Right now, I could not hear anything past it, and that was the most frightening thing in the apartment. Hey, Lily. I kissed the top of her head, soft, normal, the way I always did. You know what sounds like a really good idea right now? She made a sleepy, questioning sound. An adventure. I was already moving, slowly, deliberately, not fast enough to alarm her. Phone off the coffee table, screen dark, tucked into my palm, keys off the hook by the kitchen. Like a midnight adventure, just you and me. We're going to go sit in Aunt Sarah's car for a little bit, like camping. Lily lifted her head, looked at me with those sharp, evaluating eyes that children use when they suspect they're being managed. Why? Because, I said, and I smiled at her, and I have no idea how. It'll be fun. I'll put the heat on and we can look at the rain through the windows. It'll be so cozy. That word, her word. She thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Then she held her arms up. I picked her up, blanket and all, tucked her against my shoulder, and I walked to the front door of my apartment, down that hallway, past the linen closet with its firmly latched door, past the spare room where her little overnight bag was still sitting on the floor, and I did not look at any of it. I looked straight ahead. I focused on the door, on the chain, on getting the chain off without jostling Lily, on getting the deadbolt turned, on the door swinging open into the building corridor outside. On the other side, the lit hallway of the 3rd floor, empty, fluorescent and ordinary. I pulled the apartment door shut behind me, and I walked to the stairwell, and I did not run. Not yet. The stairwell door was heavy. It swung shut behind us with a sound like a held breath finally released, a low, echoey boom that bounced off the concrete walls and went silent. Lily stirred against my shoulder but didn't wake. I shifted her weight, got a better grip, and stood very still for a moment on the landing. Listened. 3 floors of stairwell above me, 3 floors below. The rain was a muffled presence beyond the walls, stripped of everything soft now, just a distant, constant hiss. The fluorescent light on the landing buzzed with that particular frequency that makes the inside of your skull itch. A flight down, something dripped. A pipe, probably. Just a pipe. I started moving, down the first flight, careful, because Lily was heavy and the stairs were concrete and my feet were in socks with no grip and I was shaking in a way I couldn't fully control anymore. The trembling that had been internal in the living room had worked its way out to my hands, my knees. I kept one palm flat against the painted cinder block wall and focused on each step. 1, 2, 3. Don't look up. I looked up. The stairwell above me was empty. Of course it was empty. The landing where I'd been standing 10 seconds ago was just a landing, gray concrete, buzzing light, the door to the third-floor corridor standing shut. Nothing on the stairs, nothing in the shadows at the top of the next flight. I kept moving. Second-floor landing. The door here had a small wire glass window set into it at head height, and as I passed, I glanced through it without meaning to. A reflex, the same one that makes you look at a car accident. The second-floor hallway beyond it was empty, lit, doors closed all the way down. One more flight. My phone was in my right hand, Lily's weight distributed across my left arm and shoulder, the key fob digging into my palm. I was already running the sequence in my head. Lobby door, exterior door, parking lot, my car, doors locked, then 911. Simple. 20 more seconds and I'd be outside, and outside meant open space and rain and the possibility of other people and a locked car and a phone call, and all of it would be better than the inside of that building. I hit the ground floor landing, pushed through into the lobby. The lobby of my building was nothing, a small rectangle, mailboxes on one wall, buzzer panel beside the exterior door, a mat that said welcome in letters that had mostly worn away. 2 overhead lights, both on. The space was maybe 15 feet across and I could see every corner of it. Empty. I crossed it in 5 steps, hit the exterior door bar with my hip, and then the rain came all at once, cold and immediate, soaking through my shirt in seconds, plastering my hair flat. I didn't care. I was outside. The parking lot spread out ahead of me under a flat gray wash of rain and orange-tinted light from the street beyond. My car sitting exactly where I'd left it, slick and dark, and 20 feet away. Lily made a sharp sound of protest at the cold and the wet. "Almost there, Bug. Almost there. I've got you." Key fob. 3 feet from the car. Hit unlock. The lights flashed once, twice, and I had the rear door open and Lily deposited into the back seat, blanket pulled around her. And then I was in the front, door locked, all 4 locks. The sound of them engaging the best sound I had ever heard in my life. The rain hammered the roof. I dialed 911, told them there had been an intruder in my apartment, told them I had a 6-year-old with me, told them the address, the building, the unit number, and I am fairly certain I said all of it in the wrong order and had to correct myself twice. The dispatcher was calm, direct, staying on the line. I watched the front entrance of my building through the rain-streaked windshield, the lobby visible through the glass door, the welcome mat, the buzzer panel. Nothing moved. 8 minutes later, 2 squad cars pulled into the lot. I watched them go inside. Sat in the front seat with the heat running. Lily asleep again in the back. Actually asleep, wrapped in her blanket like none of this was her problem. And I watched the entrance, and I waited. One officer came back out after 20 minutes, knocked on my window. They'd found the apartment as I'd left it. Nothing disturbed, nothing taken. But the rear stairwell door, the one that accessed the back alley, had been propped open with a brick. The fire door that was supposed to self-lock, that residents were told repeatedly not to prop. Someone had bricked it open from the outside. And near the linen closet, right there, on the hardwood I'd walked across in my socks twice that night, a partial footprint, muddy, adult-sized. Could be a transient, the officer said. Could be someone who had access before. Former tenant, contractor. Hard to say. Hard to say. He asked if I had somewhere I could stay that night. I said yes. He told me to have the building change the locks and to report any further incidents. Then he went back inside, and I sat in the car in the rain, and I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, and I breathed. I never went back to that apartment alone. My sister came home from upstate the next morning. I'd called her from the car, sometime after midnight, and she'd cried on the phone in a way that made me cry too. both of us trying to keep our voices down so Lily wouldn't wake up in the back seat. We drove to my sister's house that night. I slept on her couch with every light in the living room on, which she didn't mention, and I was grateful for. I broke my lease the following week. The building manager expressed sympathy in the careful, liability-conscious way of someone who had already spoken to a lawyer. He confirmed the rear door lock had been reported as faulty by 2 other residents over the previous month. He did not offer a refund. I didn't have the energy to fight him for one. The police never identified anyone. The footprint wasn't enough. The brick holding the door open had no prints on it, without a face, without a name, without a single piece of evidence that pointed anywhere specific. There was nothing to pursue. A case number, a file, somewhere in a cabinet, probably still sitting there. I've thought a lot in the years since about what he wanted. Whether it was random, someone looking for shelter from the rain in an unlocked building who slipped inside and found himself deeper in than he planned. Whether it wasn't random at all. Whether he had been watching the building, waiting for a night the rear door was propped, knowing which units had lights on and which ones didn't. I've thought about whether that was the first time or whether the footprint near my closet was one of many. I don't let myself think about that last part for too long. What I think about more, what I actually can't stop thinking about, is Lily's face when she told me. That complete, unclouded calm. The way she described the man in the hallway, the same way she described something she'd seen on television. Mildly interesting, already half forgotten. Not a problem because the adults would handle it. She had no idea what she'd handed me in that moment. No concept of the calculation he'd made when he looked at her, small, sleepy, 6 years old, and chose his words so carefully. It's a secret game. Don't tell. She's 9 now, old enough that my sister and I have talked to her, gently, age-appropriately, about secrets that aren't okay to keep. About the difference between a surprise and a secret. About how no adult who means well asks a child to hide something from the people who love them. Lily listened seriously and said she understood, and I think she did, mostly. Kids that age are smarter than we give them credit for. But I still think about the version of that night where she doesn't wake up, where she stays asleep, and I stay on the couch, and the sleep timer runs out, and the apartment goes quiet, and I close my eyes. I don't let myself finish that thought either. I'm more careful now than I used to be. I check the rear exits of my building when I move somewhere new. I test the weight of closet doors to learn how they hang. I notice chains on doors, whether they're still or moving, and why. Small things, private things, the kind of habits nobody sees you doing. And I trust the hum, that low, persistent, wordless signal that something is wrong before the brain has caught up to it. I spent most of that night arguing with it, talking it down, calling it paranoid and tired and dramatic. It was none of those things. It was right, the whole time. From the first moment I stood in the kitchen and noticed the hallway was dark. If something feels wrong, not alarming, not dramatic, just quietly, stubbornly wrong, I don't explain it away anymore. I listened to a child's sleeping breathing and a rain-soaked roof, and I left. That's the whole story. That's what saved us. Trust it. Whatever that voice is, wherever it lives, trust it. It doesn't care about being polite. It doesn't care about being reasonable. It just knows. And it is so much smarter than the part of you that wants everything to be fine. I found a child's shoe under my porch. No children live on my street. The shoe was a size 4T, pink with a Velcro strap, sitting in the dirt under my porch like it had always been there. I almost missed it. I was down on one knee with a flashlight checking for the source of a soft knocking sound I'd been hearing for 2 nights. Something I'd half convinced myself was an animal. A raccoon, maybe, or a possum making a nest in the crawl space. The beam of the flashlight swept across old insulation and exposed dirt and the concrete footings, and there it was. One small shoe, clean on the inside, muddy on the outside, Velcro tab still fastened. I pulled it out and stood up and looked at it for a long time in the gray April afternoon. Maplewood Drive is a dead-end street. 11 houses, all of them owner-occupied, most of them inhabited by people who have been here long enough that they know each other's recycling schedules. I moved in 14 months ago, the newcomer by a significant margin, and in that time I had learned, among other things, that there were no children on this street. The youngest resident was a woman named Greta, who was 71 and had 3 cats she treated like dependents. No young families, no kids on bikes in the summer, no Halloween costumes in the fall, no sounds of anyone under the age of 50 anywhere on this quiet, tidy cul-de-sac. I set the shoe on the porch railing, went back inside, made coffee. I want to be honest about my state of mind at the time, because it matters for the rest of this. I work from home. I'm a technical writer, which means I spend most of my days alone with a laptop and more cups of coffee than is probably advisable. I'd moved to Maplewood Drive after a breakup that had left me wanting somewhere quiet, somewhere where I wouldn't run into anyone I knew at the grocery store, somewhere I could get my head straight. I'd found all of that. I'd also found, by month 3 or 4, that a certain amount of solitude tips over into something heavier without you noticing. I'd been a little too in my own head for a while by the time I found the shoe. I say that because my first instinct wasn't alarm. It was curiosity and then a kind of irrational protectiveness, like I'd found something that needed looking after. I put the shoe on my kitchen windowsill, in case someone came looking for it. The street was quiet that evening, the way it always was, 1 or 2 porch lights coming on as the sky dimmed, the sound of a television from somewhere, the smell of rain coming in off the fields behind the houses. I'd come to find the routine of it comforting. I stood at the window with my coffee and looked at the shoe and looked at the empty street and thought about how a child's shoe ends up under a stranger's porch on a road with no children. Kids wander. That was the reasonable explanation. A family visiting someone on a nearby street. A child who slipped away for 5 minutes and lost a shoe crawling under a porch, because children crawl under things whenever the opportunity presents itself. The parents probably hadn't even noticed this particular street. The kid probably barely noticed the missing shoe until they got home. That was the reasonable explanation, and I held on to it for about a week. The knocking continued, softer on dry nights, louder when the ground was wet, which in April meant most nights. I'd lie in bed in that particular not quite asleep state and hear it below me, coming up through the floorboards of the old house like a slow, irregular pulse, too inconsistent for pipes, too quiet for an animal, just a soft, intermittent knock, knock, knock. That stopped if I got up and started again when I'd been still for long enough. My neighbor across the street, a retired postal worker named Bill, who had unofficially appointed himself the street's historian, told me old houses do that. Thermal expansion, settling foundations, wood contracting at night. He said his place did it for years before he had the crawl space properly insulated. He said I probably had a gap somewhere letting cold air in. I thanked him. I ordered extra insulation online. I told myself that was the end of it. But I kept the shoe on the windowsill. Looking back, I think some part of me understood before the rest of me was ready to. There's a version of this where I throw the shoe away on day 1 and sleep fine, and none of what came later happens to me, or rather it happens, and I'm just not there to see it. Sometimes I think that version of me was luckier. Sometimes I think I would have spent the rest of my life living on top of something I didn't understand, and I'm not sure which of those is worse. The rain came in hard that Thursday night, drumming on the roof, filling the gutters. I woke at some point in the small hours to the knocking again, louder than it had been, more urgent, and lay there in the dark, listening to it rise and fall beneath me. Knock, knock, pause, knock. I reached over and turned on the bedside lamp, sat up, looked at the ceiling the way you look at a thing when you're trying to decide whether to be afraid of it. Then I got up, went to the kitchen, and stood at the window for a long time, looking at the dark, empty street below. The shoe sat on the windowsill in front of me, small and pink and patient. Somewhere under my feet, something knocked 3 more times and went quiet. I went under the porch again on a Saturday morning, properly this time. Not just a flashlight sweep. I pulled on old clothes and a pair of work gloves and got down on my hands and knees and crawled the full length of the crawl space with my phone torch on, checking every corner, every footing, every gap where the skirting met the ground. I was looking for an animal, a nest, droppings, a point of entry, something I could seal up, problem solved, sleep through the night again. I found nothing. The dirt was undisturbed except for my own knee prints and the marks from my first visit. No droppings, no nesting material, no gaps in the skirting boards large enough for anything bigger than a mouse to fit through, and mice don't knock. They scratch. The space under my porch was empty and unremarkable, and completely without explanation. I stayed in there longer than I needed to, torch moving methodically across every surface. The ground was cold and damp through my jeans. Outside, I could hear a bird somewhere and the distant sound of Bill's lawnmower starting up across the street. Normal Saturday sounds. Normal world, 6 inches above my head. I crawled back out into the morning light and sat on my porch steps and tried to decide what to do with the fact that there was nothing down there. A week later, I found the second shoe. Not under the porch this time. In the backyard, sitting upright against the base of the fence at the far end of the garden, half hidden by the long grass I hadn't gotten around to cutting yet. I saw it from the kitchen window and stood there for a moment, just looking at it through the glass before I went outside. It matched. Same size, same pink fabric, same Velcro strap. This was the other half of the pair. It was muddier than the first one, the toe scuffed like it had been dragged across rough ground. I picked it up and turned it over in my hands. On the inside of the heel, in black marker, someone had written a name in small, careful letters. Lily. I stood in my backyard in the thin April sunlight holding a child's shoe with a name written in it and felt something shift in the back of my mind. Not fear exactly. Something more like the sensation of a lock turning. That slow, irrevocable click of things beginning to align in a direction you didn't choose. I took it inside, set it next to the first one on the windowsill. I told myself the family explanation still held. 2 shoes instead of 1 just meant the kid had been here longer, wandered further, found both the porch and the back fence. Children are thorough that way when they're exploring. The name didn't change anything. Of course, a child's shoe had a name in it. Parents do that for daycare, for preschool, so shoes don't get mixed up or lost. The name wasn't strange. The name was ordinary. I Googled missing children in the county anyway. Couldn't help it. Nothing came up. No recent reports, nothing matching the age those shoes suggested. A toddler, maybe 3 or 4 years old. I told myself that was reassuring. Closed the laptop. Opened it again an hour later and searched a different way and still found nothing. That night, I asked Bill about the street's history over the fence while he was putting his recycling out. Kept it casual, told him I'd found a couple of kids' shoes in my yard and was trying to figure out whose they were. His face did something I couldn't quite read before he settled back into his usual expression. No kids on this street, he said, which I knew. Maybe from a nearby street. Could a kid have wandered over? He looked at me for a moment. Possible, he said, but he said it the way people say things when they mean something different. He picked up his recycling bin and headed back toward his house, then paused and looked back over his shoulder. The people before you, he said carefully, had a little girl, for a while. He seemed to consider whether to say more. Things didn't work out for them here. They moved on. He went inside before I could ask what that meant. I stood at the fence in the cooling evening air and looked at my house, the warm light in the kitchen window, the porch where I'd found the first shoe, the dark gap beneath it. The yard was going dim around me, the shadows thickening along the fence line. Somewhere close by, a neighbor's wind chime moved in a breeze I couldn't feel from where I was standing. I thought about Lily, written in black marker on the inside of a shoe heel. I thought about how recently the ink had looked, not faded, not worn, clear and deliberate, like it had been written to make sure the shoe found its way home. The knocking started again that night at 2 a.m., soft and rhythmic below my bedroom floor. I lay in the dark and listened to it, and for the first time I didn't try to explain it away. I just listened. It came in patterns, I realized. Not random, not pipes, not settling wood contracting in the cold. 3 knocks, a pause, 1 knock. 3 knocks, a pause, 1 knock. Over and over, like a question being asked by someone who had been asking it for a very long time. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay there and listened to 3 and 1, 3 and 1, until it stopped somewhere around 4 in the morning, and then I lay in the silence it left behind and stared at the ceiling until the room began to go gray with early light. By the time I got up, I had made a decision. I was going to find out who had lived in this house before me. My real estate agent had been a cheerful woman named Patrice, who had the particular energy of someone professionally committed to optimism. I called her that morning and kept my tone easy, told her I was doing some home improvement research, wanted to understand the property history a little better, asked if she remembered anything about the previous owners. She was quiet for just a beat too long before she said she'd have to check her files. She called me back 2 hours later and told me the sellers had been a couple named the Marsdens, Thomas and Diane. They'd bought the house in 2019, sold it in early last year. She said it in the clipped, careful way people deliver information they've consciously edited, and when I asked whether there'd been any issues with the property, she said nothing structural, nothing material, everything disclosed. I asked if they'd had children. Another pause. I believe there was a daughter, she said. The house showed well despite, yes, I believe there was a daughter. I thanked her and hung up and sat with what she hadn't said. The county property records were public. It took me most of the afternoon to navigate the relevant databases, following the chain of ownership backward, until I found what I was looking for. Not the property records themselves, but a newspaper archive search that turned up a brief item from 18 months ago in the local paper. 6 paragraphs, the kind of story that gets filed and forgotten in small local publications, buried between council meeting minutes and letters to the editor. A child had gone missing from Maplewood Drive. Lily Marsden, age 4. She had been playing in the front yard of her family's home on a Wednesday afternoon in late October and was gone by the time her mother checked on her 20 minutes later. A search had been conducted. The article mentioned police involvement, neighbors assisting, a description, dark hair, pink sneakers, a yellow jacket. There was a follow-up piece 2 weeks later. Lily Marsden had not been found. I read it 3 times. Then I looked up at the windowsill where the 2 pink shoes sat side by side, and I felt the room do something strange. Not spin exactly, more like a subtle, nauseating shift in the quality of the air, the way a room feels in the moment before a storm arrives. She had been wearing pink sneakers. The article said, pink sneakers. I got up and went to the window and picked up the first shoe, the one I'd found under the porch, and turned it over. And then I checked the inside of the heel the way I'd checked the second one. Lily, written in black marker, same careful hand. I don't know how I'd missed it the first time. I think I hadn't looked. I think some part of me hadn't wanted to look. My hands were steady in the way hands sometimes are when the shock is large enough that your body just goes quiet and does the practical thing. I set the shoe down. I went and sat on the couch. I sat there for a long time while the afternoon light moved across the floor and the street outside went about its ordinary business, and I tried to build a rational architecture around what I knew. The shoes could have been left behind when the family moved out, overlooked in the chaos of packing. A grieving family in the process of leaving a house where the worst thing had happened to them. It was entirely plausible that a pair of shoes had been missed. Found their way under the porch, into the yard, through the natural processes of weather and seasonal change. It was plausible. It was reasonable. I tried very hard to find it convincing. Then I thought about how clean the inside of the first shoe had been, how the Velcro had still been fastened, how it had been sitting upright against the fence, not on its side the way something discarded would lie, how it had looked placed rather than lost. That evening I knocked on Bill's door. He took a moment to answer, and when he did, he looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite name, not unfriendly, but braced, like he'd been expecting me. I told him what I'd found, what I'd read. I watched his face while I talked, looking for surprise, and didn't find any. I didn't know if it was my place to say anything, he said quietly. He stepped back from the door. Come in. His house smelled like old wood and coffee. He sat me down at his kitchen table and told me what he knew, which was more than the newspaper had printed. Lily Marsden had disappeared from directly in front of my house. The search had gone on for 11 days. Thomas Marsden had found one of her shoes in the backyard on the third day of searching, and the other, he paused here, set his coffee cup down. The other had been found under the porch by a police officer doing a grid search of the property. Both shoes, found in the same places I'd found them. I felt the cold move through me then. Not a chill, something deeper than that. The specific cold of understanding something you cannot take back once you've understood it. They moved out in February, Bill said. Couldn't stay. I don't blame them. He looked at his hands. I've heard things sometimes from across the street. At night, a sort of knocking, I said. He looked up at me. 3 and then 1, I said. Over and over. Bill's face did something then that I haven't been able to forget. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the expression of a man who had been hoping he was wrong about something for a very long time and had just found out he wasn't. I thought it was the pipes, he said, but he said it like an apology. I drove home from Bill's in the dark and sat in my car in the driveway for a long time before I went inside. I want to try to explain what I was feeling because it wasn't what you might expect. It wasn't the clean, clarifying terror of a horror movie. The kind that tells you exactly what to do and where to run. It was something quieter and more disorienting than that. It was grief, mostly. Grief for a child I'd never known who had been 4 years old and wearing pink sneakers on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon, and who had been here, on this street, in front of this house, and then hadn't been anymore. That was the thing sitting in my chest as I looked at my front porch in the dark. Not fear of what was under it, sorrow for who had been. I went inside. I stood in the kitchen. I looked at the 2 shoes on the windowsill for a long time. Then I took them both and went back outside. I don't know what I intended exactly. I hadn't made a plan. I just found myself standing on the porch with a shoe in each hand, and then I was crouching down, and then I was placing them carefully side by side in the dirt just inside the opening of the crawl space against the foundation. Together, the Velcro straps fastened, toes pointing outward toward the yard, the way a child's shoes look when a child is standing in them. I straightened up. The street was completely still. No wind, no traffic, not even the sound of a television from a neighboring house. The kind of quiet that feels less like absence and more like attention. I went inside and locked the door and went to bed. The knocking woke me at 2 a.m., but it was different this time. I lay in the dark and listened, and it took me a moment to understand what had changed. The pattern. 3 and 1, 3 and 1. That repetitive question I'd been hearing for weeks. It wasn't that anymore. What I was hearing now was longer, more varied. Irregular in a way that felt less mechanical and more, I don't have a better word for this, conversational. Like something shifting from a loop into a language. I got up. I pulled on my shoes and my jacket over my pajamas, and I went downstairs without turning on a single light. I'm still not entirely sure why. It was the same instinct that had made me put the shoes back. Not bravery, not investigation. Something that felt closer to courtesy. Like whatever was happening under my house deserved to be met with some form of presence rather than avoidance. I sat down on the porch steps in the dark. The air was cold and smelled of wet earth and rain somewhere in the distance. The knocking continued below me, slow, deliberate. And then, while I sat there, it changed again. 1 knock. Long silence. 1 knock. Then nothing. I sat very still. The cold was working its way through my jacket, through my clothes, settling into my skin. Clouds had moved in over the street, and the darkness was total now. No moon, no stars, just the soft amber smear of a distant street lamp at the far end of Maplewood Drive. I said her name, quietly, into the dark, feeling foolish and frightened, and something else I couldn't name, just her name, Lily. The silence afterward was the deepest silence I have ever sat inside of. And then, very softly, from directly beneath me, one knock. I pressed my hand flat against the porch boards. The wood was cold and damp and still. I held my breath. I waited. One knock, right beneath my palm, so soft it was barely more than a vibration, like something on the other side of the wood pressing back. I don't know how long I sat there like that. Long enough that my hand went numb from the cold. Long enough that the distant street lamp flickered once and settled. The knocking didn't come again. Just that one soft response, and then quiet, and then nothing. I was crying by the time I went back inside. I'm not ashamed of that. I stood in my kitchen in the dark, with my hand still cold from the porch boards, and I cried for a little girl I had never met, whose name had been written in careful marker in a shoe that had found its way back to the same patch of dirt twice, whose family had left this house hollowed out, whose question, whatever it was, had been knocking in the dark for 18 months with no one listening. I'd listened. That was all I had to offer. It felt like nothing. It felt like everything. I called the detective assigned to Lily Marsden's case the next morning. His name was Carver, and he had the weary, careful voice of a man who had spent a long time living with an open file. I told him about the shoes. I told him where I'd found them, the exact spots, and that I knew those were the same locations they'd been found before. I told him I thought he should know they'd come back. He was quiet for a moment. "I'll come by this week," he said. Not dismissive, not skeptical, just heavy, the way someone sounds when they're picking up a weight they never fully put down. He came on a Thursday. He looked under the porch for a long time. He photographed the shoes where I'd placed them, bagged them, stood in my kitchen, and asked his careful questions. Before he left, he stood on my porch and looked out at the street with his hands in his pockets. "She was a good kid," he said. Not to me specifically, just to the air, to the street, to whatever might be listening. "We're still looking." He left. I stood on the porch and watched his car until it turned off Maplewood Drive. That night, the house was silent. No knocking, not at 2 a.m., not at 3. Just the sound of rain beginning softly on the roof, filling the gutters, running down the windows, ordinary and steady and almost gentle. That was 8 months ago. I still live on Maplewood Drive. I know that probably surprises you. It surprises me sometimes too when I think about it directly. People ask why I didn't leave, and I find it genuinely difficult to explain. The closest I've gotten to an honest answer is this. Leaving felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. The same way it would feel wrong to walk out of a room where someone was trying to tell you something before they'd finished telling it. I wasn't done here. I don't know if I'm done here now, but I'm still here. And some nights that feels like the bravest thing I've ever done, and some nights it feels like pure stubbornness, and most nights it feels like both. Detective Carver has called me 4 times since that Thursday visit. Not with news, without it, which is its own kind of news. The case is still open. They are still looking. He says it the same way every time, in that weighted, careful voice, and I believe him. I think he will be saying it for the rest of his career, and I think he knows that too. And I think he calls me anyway because Maplewood Drive is the last place Lily Marsden's trail goes warm, and he needs someone there to keep paying attention. I keep paying attention. The knocking comes back sometimes. Not with the frequency or urgency it had in those first weeks. Not that desperate 3-in-1 that felt like something wearing itself down against a locked door. It's quieter now. Occasional. A soft, single knock on a cold night, or 2 in slow succession, like a person absently tapping their fingers on a table while they think. I've stopped being frightened by it. I don't know if that's wisdom or something closer to acceptance, but I've made my peace with the sound the way you make peace with things you cannot change and would not change even if you could. I still go out sometimes and sit on the porch steps in the dark, not every time I hear it, but sometimes when the street is quiet and the hour is late and it feels right. I don't always say anything. Sometimes I just sit there and let the night be what it is and try to be a presence rather than an absence, something that stayed rather than something that left. I've thought a great deal about what happened on that porch, about what that one soft knock meant, or whether it meant anything at all, whether I was a grieving woman sitting alone in the dark at 2 a.m, projecting feeling onto the ordinary sounds of an old house. I go back and forth. I'll probably go back and forth for the rest of my life. But here's what I keep returning to. The shoes came back. Not once, twice, and to the same locations, found by 2 different people in 2 different years. The knocking had a pattern that changed when I responded to it. And when I said her name out loud into the dark for the first time, something on the other side of those boards pressed back. Maybe there's an explanation for all of it that I'm not equipped to find. Maybe a geologist or a structural engineer or someone who understands old houses better than I do could walk through here and account for every creak and knock and tell me exactly how the soil and the weather and the age of the wood conspire to produce the sounds I've been hearing. Maybe the shoes really were just overlooked twice in the same corners by coincidence. Maybe my hand was numb from the cold and I imagined the vibration. Maybe. I repainted the front porch in September. The previous paint was peeling badly and it needed doing. Practical, nothing more. I did it on a weekend. 2 coats of gray, working carefully around the edges and the boards. When I was done, I sat back on the steps and looked at it in the late afternoon sun and thought about how much time and attention I'd put into a single small porch on a dead-end street and felt something that took me a moment to identify. It felt like keeping house for someone. Bill came over while I was cleaning up the brushes. He looked at the porch for a moment, then at me, and nodded once in the way that means more than whatever words would have been. We stood there for a moment in the quiet of the street, the maple trees going gold at the far end, the smell of autumn coming in, the long shadows of late afternoon stretching across the road. "You're a good neighbor," he said finally, and went back home. I've thought about that a lot too. What it means to be a good neighbor on a street where a child went into the air one October afternoon and never came back. What it means to live in a house with a history you didn't make but inherited. Whether staying counts for anything, whether listening counts for anything, whether a woman sitting on a porch in the dark saying a little girl's name into the night does anything at all for anyone. I don't know. I genuinely don't know. What I know is that Lily Marsden was 4 years old. She had dark hair and a yellow jacket, and her name was written in the heels of her shoes in careful black marker, so they'd find their way home if they got lost. I know she was here. I know someone should remember that. So I stay, and I listen. And some nights when the house is quiet and the rain is coming down soft on the roof and everything on Maplewood Drive is still, I put my hand flat against the porch boards the way I did that night, just to let her know someone is still there, just in case she can tell. My toddler waves at the same corner of her room every night at exactly the same time. The nanny cam shows nothing there. I'm the person people call when they need something explained. That's not arrogance. It's just always been true. I'm a structural engineer by trade, which means I spend my days looking at things other people find mysterious or alarming and reducing them to their component parts. A crack in a foundation wall, a beam that shifts under load, a building that doesn't behave the way it should. There is always an explanation. There is always a cause. My entire professional life is built on the understanding that the physical world follows rules, that if something appears to break those rules, you haven't found the right angle yet. My wife Danny would tell you that this makes me insufferable to live with. She is not entirely wrong. So when she started mentioning the waving, casually at first, over dinner, in that careful tone she uses when she knows I'm going to push back. I did exactly what she expected me to do. I nodded, I asked a few questions, I offered 4 or 5 reasonable explanations, and I moved on. Toddlers wave at things. Wren was 18 months old and had recently discovered that waving produced enthusiastic responses from every adult in her life, and had therefore begun waving at furniture, at windows, at the dog's water bowl. She waved at the vacuum cleaner with genuine affection. The idea that she was waving at a specific corner of her room at a specific time every night was something I filed under pattern recognition bias. Danny was watching the nanny cam footage at random intervals, and her brain was doing what brains do, stitching coincidences into meaning. I said this gently and with love. Danny gave me the look she reserves for moments when she is certain she is right and is choosing to wait me out. We'd moved into the house 4 months earlier, a 1960s split level in a neighborhood that had aged unevenly. Some houses maintained to the point of renovation vanity, others left to quietly accumulate decades. Ours was somewhere in the middle. Good bones, as the listing had said, which in real estate is a polite way of noting that the cosmetics needed work, but the structure was sound. That part, at least, I'd verified myself. The bones were fine. Wren's room was at the end of the upstairs hallway, northeast corner of the house. We'd painted it a soft yellow, assembled the crib ourselves on a Saturday afternoon with the windows open, hung little paper stars from the ceiling that turned slowly in the draft from the vent. It was a good room. It smelled like fresh paint and the cedar of her dresser, and faintly, in damp weather, like the old house underneath all our renovations. The nanny cam sat on the dresser, angled to cover the crib and most of the room. Motion activated, night vision capable. The footage synced to an app on both our phones. Danny checked it more than I did. That was how she'd noticed it first, scrolling back through overnight footage on a Sunday morning while I made coffee, going quiet in a way that made me turn around. "Come look at this," she said. I looked. Wren was sitting up in her crib, 11:47 p.m. on the timestamp, facing the northeast corner of the room, the corner with nothing in it. And she was waving. A slow, deliberate wave, the kind you'd give someone across a room. Not frantic, not playful, calm and certain, the way you wave at someone you know. I watched the clip 3 times. Then I handed Danny's phone back and told her it was probably a shadow or a light reflection from outside, or the way the night vision rendered movement in the curtain. That was on a Sunday. By Wednesday, I'd watched the footage from the previous 11 nights. 11 nights. 11 timestamps. The spread across those timestamps was less than 4 minutes, and 8 of the 11 were exactly, precisely, 11:47 p.m. I didn't tell Danny that part. Not yet. I sat with it alone in my home office at midnight, with the app open on my laptop, the clips lined up in a row. And I went looking, very methodically, the way I approach everything, for the explanation that was definitely there. I'm still looking. The first thing I ruled out was light interference. My street has 2 amber sodium lamps, and I mapped their angles against Wren's window at night with the same precision I'd use on a site assessment. Neither one reaches the northeast corner at the right trajectory. The curtains are blackout. We'd bought them specifically to keep the room dark for her sleep. And even with them open, which they never are at night, the geometry doesn't produce a reflection that would land in that corner at floor level, which is where Wren's gaze was consistently directed. Not the wall, not the ceiling, the floor of the corner, around 18 inches up at most. I ruled out the vent next. There's a floor register in the northeast corner, original to the house, and I spent an evening watching what the airflow does to the lightweight objects in that room. The paper stars above the crib, a small fabric mobile, a piece of tissue I placed deliberately near the register. The movement was inconsistent and directional, nothing that would produce a visual stimulus at the same time every night. I rechecked the HVAC schedule on the thermostat. The system cycles on a programmable timer, but the cycle nearest to 11:47 p.m. runs at 11:30, and the register in question is on the return line, not the supply. Cold air in, not out. I know how this reads. I know it sounds like a man building an elaborate case to avoid the conclusion he doesn't want to reach. Danny said something close to that, carefully, one evening when she found me cross-referencing the cam footage with the thermostat logs. She wasn't wrong. But here's the thing about being someone who believes in explanations. You can't stop looking for them just because they're not where you expected. You look harder. You look longer. You look in every corner you can think of before you accept that you've run out of corners. I hadn't run out yet, but the list was getting shorter. It was my mother-in-law who introduced the variable I'd been successfully avoiding. She came to visit on a Thursday, 3 weeks into my quiet investigation, and she was in Wren's room for maybe 10 minutes before she came back downstairs with an expression I couldn't immediately read. Not alarmed, thoughtful. The way someone looks when they're deciding how much to say. "That's a cold room," she said. "The insulation in the exterior walls is original," I told her. "It's on my list." She looked at me for a moment. "That's not what I mean. Her name is Lorraine, and she is not a superstitious woman. She's a retired school principal who ran a district of 4,000 students for 12 years and has the disposition of someone who has heard every possible excuse and is not in the business of indulging nonsense. Which is part of why what she said next landed differently than it would have from someone else. "Has Wren always done well in that room?" she asked. "Sleeping, I mean. Has she always been settled in there?" I started to say yes, and then I stopped. Because the honest answer was more complicated than yes. Wren had never been a difficult sleeper in the clinical sense. She went down on schedule. She didn't fight bedtime. She didn't wake screaming. But there was something I'd catalogued and set aside without examining too closely. In the 4 months we'd lived in this house, she had never once slept past 11:50 p.m. without waking. Not once. She'd sleep soundly from 7 until sometime between 11:43 and 11:52, at which point she'd sit up, alert, oriented, not crying, not distressed, and then eventually lie back down and sleep through until morning. We'd assumed it was a sleep cycle thing, a developmental phase. I said this to Lorraine. She nodded slowly, the way she does when she's listening to something and finding it significant for reasons she hasn't shared yet. "When did you say you moved in?" she asked. "February, the 14th. "And before you, did you know the house at all? Did you know who lived here?" I told her we'd bought from an estate. The previous owner had died, an older man, a widower, lived alone for the last several years. No children still in the area. The estate sale had cleared most of the contents before we took possession. Lorraine was quiet for a moment. "What corner of the room does she wave at?" she said. Something moved through me that I didn't have a name for. A structural engineer's version of a chill, maybe. The specific sensation of identifying a load-bearing element you'd previously miscalculated. "Northeast," I said. "Why?" She set down her tea. "Because that's where the bed would have been," she said. "In a room that size, in a house this age, that's where you put the bed. The warmest corner in winter, away from the window drafts." She looked at me steadily. "That's where an old man would have slept for 30 years. The house was very quiet around us. Upstairs, through the baby monitor on the kitchen counter, I could hear Wren breathing in the even, untroubled rhythm of afternoon sleep. I didn't say anything. There was nothing in my professional vocabulary for what Lorraine had just suggested, and nothing in my personal vocabulary either. And so I sat there with my untouched coffee and looked at the monitor and listened to my daughter breathe and felt, for the first time since this started, the specific discomfort of a man who has run the numbers and doesn't like what they're telling him. That night, I set the nanny cam to continuous record. I told myself it was for data purposes. I needed more footage, a larger sample, better resolution on exactly where her gaze was directed. That was all. That was the only reason. I checked the footage at 11:52 p.m. from my phone in bed. 11:47, same as always. Wren sitting up, facing the corner, one small hand raised in that slow and certain wave. 8 seconds of it. Then she lowered her hand, settled back against the mattress, and closed her eyes. I watched it 4 times, the way I had the first clip. And on the 4th pass, I finally made myself look at what I'd been looking past for 3 weeks. Not at Wren, not at the corner, but at the room around them, at the quality of her attention, at the absolute stillness of a child who is not waving at shadows or vents or the product of a developing brain's pattern noise. She was waving at something. The unhurried, comfortable certainty of it was the most frightening thing I had ever seen. I told Danny the next morning. Not everything. Not the thermostat logs or the light angle calculations or the 17 clips I'd catalogued by timestamp in a spreadsheet that I'd titled, with grim irony, Wren's Sleep Anomalies. Just the essential facts. 11 nights confirmed, the timestamps clustering tightly around 11:47, and what Lorraine had said about the corner. She listened without interrupting, which is not her default mode, which told me she'd been waiting for me to get here. "I've been watching it for 6 weeks," she said. "I know." "You told me it was pattern recognition bias." "I know." She didn't say, "I told you so." She's not built that way. She just looked at me across the kitchen table with the careful patience of someone who has been frightened alone for a month and a half, and is relieved, at least, to no longer be frightened alone. That was almost worse than anger would have been. "So what do we do?" she said. I told her I wanted to find out more about the previous owner first. Something concrete, something I could actually hold. Because as much as Lorraine's observation about the bed corner had settled into me like a splinter, I was not ready, professionally, constitutionally, to accept "old man used to sleep there" as a meaningful data point. People sleep in corners. Houses have histories. I needed something specific before I was willing to take the next step in whatever direction this was going. The estate attorney's name was in the closing paperwork. I called him on a Friday afternoon, introduced myself as the new owner, following up on a minor title question, and then, less smoothly than I'd intended, asked about the man who'd lived there. His name had been Gerald Marsh, 78 years old, widower since 2019, when his wife of 41 years had died after a short illness. No children. Had lived in the house since 1987. The estate had been administered by a nephew in another state who hadn't visited in several years and had been primarily interested in a clean, quick sale. I asked, as casually as I could manage, whether Gerald had died in the house. A pause. "He did," the attorney said. "In his sleep. Very peaceful, from what we understand." I thanked him. I sat with the phone in my hand for a while after hanging up. 41 years in that house. 35 of them presumably sleeping in the northeast corner of what was now my daughter's room, in the spot Lorraine had identified without ever being told. A man who had outlived his wife by 4 years and spent those 4 years alone in these rooms, in this quiet, until one night he simply didn't wake up. I'm not a sentimental person. I don't believe in things I can't measure. But I sat in my home office that afternoon listening to the late October rain moving across the roof in slow sheets, and I thought about Gerald Marsh dying alone in the corner of a room that now belonged to my 18-month-old daughter, and I felt something shift in me. Not belief, exactly. More like the structural engineer's acknowledgement that a load exists even before you've identified what's carrying it. Something was in that corner. Whether it was Gerald Marsh, or grief, or the particular atmospheric density of a life lived long in one place, I couldn't tell you. But something had been there every night at 11:47, and my daughter had been waving at it for at least 6 weeks, and she had never once seemed afraid. That last part was the thing I kept returning to. She wasn't afraid. In every clip, every timestamp, every 8 seconds of slow, deliberate waving, Wren looked exactly the way she looked when she waved at our neighbor across the fence, or at her grandmother through the car window. Comfortable, recognized, like she was greeting someone she expected to see. I told myself this was reassuring. Some nights it almost was. Then the footage changed. It was a Tuesday, 5 days after my conversation with the estate attorney. I was in bed, Danny already asleep beside me, rain tapping steadily against the window, and I had my phone face up on the nightstand with the Nanny Cam app open the way I'd taken to doing. Not watching actively, just keeping it accessible. Danny had asked me to stop doing this. She said it was making it worse. She was probably right. 11:47 came and went. I watched Wren sit up, watched her face the corner, watched the small hand rise, and then I sat up too, because Wren had stopped waving. She was still facing the corner, still sitting upright with that eerie, focused attention she brought to this every single night. But her arm was down. Both arms were down. She was just sitting there, very still, staring. The clip ran for 22 seconds. Wren didn't move, didn't wave, didn't lie back down. She just stared into the corner with an expression I couldn't fully read on the small screen. Something concentrated and intent, the way a child looks when they're listening carefully to something just beyond the threshold of what the adults around them can hear. Then she did something she had never done before. She reached out. Both arms extended toward the corner, the universal gesture of a toddler who wants to be picked up. Hands open, fingers spread, leaning slightly forward over the crib rail, with the complete physical confidence of a child who is absolutely certain that what they're reaching for is going to catch them. My mouth went dry. I was out of bed before I'd made any conscious decision to move. Down the hallway, in the dark, the rain loud against the roof now, hitting the skylight above the stairs with that heavy, insistent drumming that makes the whole house feel smaller and closer than it is. I didn't run. I don't know why, some instinct toward not making noise, not disturbing whatever equilibrium existed in that room. But I moved fast, one hand on the wall, eyes adjusting to the dark. I pushed open Wren's door. She was sitting in the crib, arms still extended toward the corner, perfectly balanced, perfectly still. I crossed the room. I stepped between her and the corner without thinking, the way you step between your child and a street. Turned my back to it, picked her up. She was warm and solid and smelled like sleep. And she made the small, indignant sound she makes when her routine is interrupted. For one surreal moment, I just stood there, holding my daughter in the dark room in the rain, my back to the northeast corner, every nerve in my body quietly insisting that I not turn around. So I didn't. I carried her out of the room, pulled the door shut behind me, and stood in the hallway under the low yellow glow of the nightlight, with Wren on my shoulder, and my heart doing something irregular and loud behind my ribs. She was asleep again inside of 2 minutes. I stood there for considerably longer than that. Danny found me in the hallway at 12:20 a.m. She'd woken to the empty space beside her and followed the nightlight, and she stood in the doorway of our bedroom in her socks, looking at me with Wren slack and sleeping on my shoulder, and didn't ask any questions. Just looked at my face and read whatever she found there. "Show me," she said quietly. I pulled up the clip on my phone, held it so we could both watch. Wren sitting up, the stillness where the waving used to be, and then the arms going out, open hands, absolute certainty, leaning toward something in the corner with the full, unguarded trust of a child who has never once been dropped. Danny watched it twice. Then she looked up at me, and I could see her doing the same thing I'd been doing for weeks. The same internal negotiation between what she wanted to be true and what the footage was showing her. "We need to move her room," she said. "Yes." "Tomorrow," Yes. We put Wren back down in a crib that night, only because it was nearly midnight and we had nowhere else to immediately put her. And I will be honest with you, neither of us slept. Danny lay beside me, rigid and wakeful, and I stared at the ceiling and watched the MannyCam app. And at 11:47, there was nothing. Wren's crib was empty because we'd brought her in with us. The room was dark and still, and the corner was just a corner. And at 11:48, I finally put the phone face down on the nightstand and closed my eyes. We moved her to the small room across the hall the next day. It had been a home office for Gerald Marsh, according to the estate documents, which I found myself thinking about more than I wanted to. But it was bright and south-facing and entirely without history as far as we could establish, and we repainted it the same soft yellow as the old room, and reassembled the crib by the window, and hung the paper stars, and told ourselves this was just a practical decision about space. For 11 days, Wren slept through the night without waking. 11 nights. I counted them the same way I'd counted the timestamps, with the same obsessive precision. And on the 11th morning, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and allowed myself to feel something close to relief. It was over. Whatever it had been, sleep cycle disruption, environmental stimulus, the particular sensitivity that very young children sometimes have to things adults have learned to tune out, it was over. The new room had broken the pattern. That was all. That was enough. On the 12th night, Wren woke at 11:47. I heard her on the monitor before I was fully conscious. That familiar, alert wakefulness, not crying, just present. Awake and oriented, the way she always was. I reached for my phone. She was sitting up in the new crib, in the new room, facing the south window. Nothing unusual about that. The window was where the light came in, the most visually interesting surface in the room. She was a toddler who'd woken in the night and was looking toward light. Completely normal. I was almost back asleep when the notification came through. Motion detected. Secondary motion, the app called it. Movement below the threshold of the primary alert. The kind produced by a very small or very slow-moving source. I opened the clip. Wren was still facing the window, and she was waving. Not at the window, not at the light or the curtain or anything the window might plausibly contain. Her body was angled toward the window, but her head was turned, sharply and deliberately, toward the left, toward the interior corner of the new room, the southwest corner, the one closest to the hallway, the one that had no history we knew of, the one I had chosen specifically because it had no history. Her hand moved in that slow, familiar arc. I sat up in bed. The wave lasted 6 seconds. Then she turned back toward the window and lay down and closed her eyes. I put my phone face down and pressed both palms flat on the mattress and breathed and tried to think like the structural engineer I am. Load and response, cause and effect. The physical world follows rules, but here is what I couldn't engineer my way around. Whatever Wren was waving at had not been in the northeast corner of her old room. It had followed her. That thought arrived fully formed and sat in my chest like cold water finding its level, and I couldn't drain it out. I couldn't rationalize past it. Because the northeast corner had been explainable as coincidence. Gerald Marsh's corner, his longtime bedroom, a location with a fixed history. But the southwest corner of a repainted office across the hall had no history. No dead man's bed, no 40 years of occupancy, nothing that could account for a recurring presence at 11:47 p.m. Nothing except Wren. Whatever this was, whatever she'd been waving at for weeks, it wasn't attached to the room. I got up, walked down the hall, stood outside her door with my hand on the knob for a long moment, listening. Rain on the roof, steady and patient. The same rain that had been cycling through for days. Wren's breathing, even and soft, through the monitor in my pocket. I opened the door. The room was dark. The nightlight threw its low amber wash across the crib, across the new yellow walls, across the south window where rain ran in thin rivulets down the glass. The southwest corner was just a corner. I stood in the doorway and looked at it for a long time. The way you look at something that you know has just moving, but has stopped moving by the time you turned around. That specific, humiliating quality of stillness that is not the same as emptiness. Wren slept. I checked a corner one more time. Then I crossed the room, sat down in the nursing chair beside her crib, and stayed there until morning. Wren is 3 now. She stopped waking at 11:47, about 4 months after the night I sat in that chair. Gradually at first, the time stamps loosening, the gaps between occurrences stretching from nights to weeks to nothing. The last clip I have of her waving is dated March 14th. She's been sleeping clean and uninterrupted ever since, the way toddlers are supposed to sleep, the way I spent almost a year desperately wanting her to sleep. We're still in the house. I want to be clear about that because people always assume we left. We didn't. The school district is good, and the bones are sound, and Wren loves her room and has no memory, as far as we can tell, as far as any of this is possible to verify, of any of it. She's never mentioned it, never looked at a corner with that particular quality of attention again. As far as she's concerned, she has always simply lived here, and the room has always simply been hers. I've thought a lot about Gerald Marsh. I had no particular reason to think about him as a person before all of this started. He was a line in the closing documents, a category on a death certificate, a set of boot prints in the history of a house. But I know more about him now than I intended to. I know he lived here for 37 years. I know he lost his wife on a Thursday in November, and that the death notice in the local paper described her as his partner in everything. I know he spent the last 4 years of his life alone in these rooms, without children, without her. And I know he died quietly in the corner of what is now Wren's room, on a night that, based on what the attorney told me, would have been very much like this. Cold, raining, the house settling around him in the dark. I don't know what he wanted. I don't know what she offered him. I'm not sure those are the right questions, but here is what I believe. And I say that as someone who has spent his entire professional life treating belief as the thing you resort to when the measurements run out. I think Gerald Marsh was lonely. The particular, accumulated loneliness of a man who had loved someone for 41 years and then had no one left to receive it. And I think that Wren, who at 18 months had no understanding of death or loneliness or the weight a house carries after long occupation, simply saw him. The way children see things before the world teaches them not to. Without fear, without framework, without any of the elaborate apparatus adults build to avoid looking directly at what's there. She waved at him the way she waved at everyone, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I can't explain what changed in March. I don't know if he left or moved on or simply stopped visiting, or if whatever he had needed was, over those months, quietly and completely given. I like to think it was the last one. I like to think that a toddler in yellow pajamas waving goodnight from her crib every evening for 6 months was, for a lonely old man in whatever form he persisted, something like enough. The nanny cam is still on the dresser. I still check it some nights, though less than I used to. The northeast corner is where we put the small white bookshelf last spring. Board books mostly, and a stuffed elephant Wren has named Gerald for reasons she cannot explain, and which she does not find strange at all. Danny noticed the name first. She came and found me in the kitchen and stood in the doorway and looked at me for a long moment without saying anything. "I know," I said. She nodded, went back to what she was doing. We don't talk about it much. There isn't really anything left to say. The measurements ran out a long time ago, and what remained after them is something I don't have a professional vocabulary for, and have stopped trying to find one. Some loads I've come to understand. You just learn to carry.